Hey everyone, this video unpacks one of the most mysterious locations in Ark Raiders lore. Stella Montis, the research facility that might hold answers to why the Arks invaded Earth in the first place. And I've pieced together scattered data logs, environmental storytelling, and community findings to reconstruct what actually went down there before everything fell apart. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. Now, when I started compiling this video, I had to make a choice about how to present Stella Montis. The game gives us fragments, pieces of terminal entries, abandoned equipment, and those eerie holograms scattered throughout the ruins. I decided to organize this chronologically rather than by location or faction, because the timeline reveals something crucial. Stella Montis wasn't just studying the Arks, they were trying to communicate with them. And that decision, that one specific attempt at contact, might be the reason Earth is in the state it's in now. I've also chosen to emphasize the human element here, the researchers and their deteriorating mental states, because their personal logs suggest they knew something terrible was coming long before the first Ark fell from the sky. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Stella Montis. Stella Montis started as a geothermal research station in 2031, built into the side of a mountain range in what used to be northern Scandinavia. The facility was funded by a coalition of private tech corporations and government agencies, all interested in sustainable energy solutions for an increasingly resource-starved planet. According to the earliest records I found in the game files, the station employed about 200 personnel at its peak, mostly engineers, geologists, and energy specialists. The location was chosen specifically because of unusual electromagnetic readings in the bedrock, readings that suggested a massive untapped energy source deep beneath the mountain. What's interesting is that these readings were inconsistent with any known geological formation, but the project leads dismissed the anomalies as instrument errors or naturally occurring magnetic fields. They were wrong. The facility itself was massive, spreading across 12 levels that descended into the mountain like a reverse tower. The upper levels housed living quarters, administrative offices, and the main research labs. The middle levels contained the geothermal drilling equipment and power generation systems. The lower levels, the ones we only see partially in the game, were dedicated to what the documents called anomaly research. This suggests that pretty early on, someone at Stella Montis realized they weren't just dealing with geothermal energy. The architectural layout points toward a deliberate separation between the public-facing research and whatever was happening in those deeper levels. Security clearances were stratified, with only about 30 people having access to levels 9 through 12. Dr. Elena Vasquez appears in multiple data logs as the chief science officer, and her early entries are optimistic, almost excited. She talks about revolutionary energy potential and solving the global power crisis within a decade. Her team included Dr. Marcus Webb, a physicist specializing in electromagnetic phenomena, and Dr. Yuki Tanaka, whose background in xenobiology seems oddly out of place for a geothermal project. That detail alone suggests someone suspected they might encounter something biological, or at least something alive down there. The personnel roster also included a significant security presence, which seems excessive for a civilian research station. 20 armed guards for 200 scientists raises questions about what they expected to find, or what they were afraid might find them. The first 6 months of operation were apparently routine. The drilling progressed ahead of schedule, and the energy readings grew stronger as they descended. Dr. Vasquez's logs from this period are technical and boring, filled with equations and efficiency reports. But there's a single entry from month 7 that changes everything. She describes a drilling team breaking through into a cavity at level 10, a chamber that shouldn't exist according to all their geological surveys. The chamber was perfectly spherical, about 50 meters in diameter, and its walls were lined with a substance that none of their instruments could identify. It wasn't rock, wasn't metal, wasn't any known material in their database. And it was warm. Warmer than it should be at that depth, warm in a way that suggested it was generating its own heat. The discovery of the sphere chamber kicked off a new phase of research at Stella Montis. Dr. Webb's electromagnetic readings inside the chamber went off the scale, suggesting energy flows that defied conventional physics. Dr. Tanaka took samples of the wall material and found it contained structures that resembled cellular organization, but not based on carbon or any earthly biochemistry. The official designation changed from Geothermal Research Station to Anomaly Containment and Study Facility. That language, containment and study, implies they already understood this was something that needed to be kept secret and controlled. Within weeks, the corporate sponsors withdrew their public association with the project, and government funding increased dramatically. Stella Montis went dark, disappearing from public records and scientific journals. Whatever they found in that sphere, it was big enough to justify erasing an entire research station from the world's awareness. Chapter 2: First Contact Protocols. The decision to attempt communication with the sphere came from Dr. Vasquez herself, and her logs suggest she faced significant opposition from the security director, a man named Colonel David Rain. Rain appears in several entries, arguing that any attempted interaction was reckless and potentially catastrophic. He wanted the sphere sealed and the facility evacuated until they understood what they were dealing with. But Vasquez countered that the sphere was already active, already doing something, and that ignoring it wouldn't make them safer. Her argument was that understanding the sphere was the only path to safety. In retrospect, one possible reading of these exchanges is that both of them were right, and both of them were doomed, regardless of which path they chose. The communication attempts began with simple electromagnetic pulses, patterns that mimicked mathematical constants and basic geometric shapes. The idea was to establish that they were intelligent beings trying to make contact. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. The sphere remained inert, its walls continuing their low hum of energy, but showing no response to the signals. Then on day 22, the sphere responded. Dr. Webb's logs describe it as a cascade of light that filled the chamber, geometric patterns that shifted and evolved in ways that suggested intentionality. The patterns weren't random, they contained information, layers of data encoded in frequencies that human technology could barely detect. The team recorded everything, spent weeks trying to decode the response, and what they found suggests the sphere was sending them a warning. The decoded message, as interpreted by Dr. Tanaka, contained 3 distinct components. The first was a star map showing Earth's location relative to what appeared to be origin points scattered across the galaxy. The second was a series of images depicting machines, vast mechanical entities that moved between worlds. The third was what Tanaka called a timeline, a sequence showing these machines arriving at worlds and those worlds going dark. The implication was obvious and terrifying. The sphere wasn't just an anomaly or an energy source. It was a beacon, and by activating it, by responding to it, Stella Montis had just announced Earth's location to something that traveled between stars. Colonel Rain immediately called for evacuation, but Dr. Vasquez made the decision that would seal their fate. She argued they needed to understand the full message before abandoning the facility. She believed there might be information about how to defend against the machines, or how to shut down the beacon. The research team split into factions after the decoded message. About half agreed with Rain that evacuation was the only rational choice. The other half, led by Vasquez, believed they had a responsibility to learn everything they could before the machines arrived. Personal logs from this period reveal increasing paranoia and stress among the personnel. People stopped sleeping, relationships fractured, and several researchers reported vivid nightmares about falling stars and screaming metal. One particularly disturbing entry from a junior researcher named Sarah Chen describes waking up to find herself standing in the sphere chamber with no memory of how she got there. Security footage confirmed she had walked through 3 locked doors while apparently asleep. Similar incidents began occurring across the facility, suggesting the sphere's influence was spreading beyond the physical chamber. Dr. Vasquez authorized the second round of communication attempts, this time trying to ask direct questions through mathematical frameworks. They wanted to know how long before the machines arrived, whether there was a way to deactivate the beacon, and what the machines wanted. The sphere's response came within hours, much faster than before. The message contained schematics, designs for technology that seemed decades or centuries beyond human capability. Energy shields, propulsion systems, weapons that could theoretically damage the machines. It was everything they needed to fight back, But embedded in those schematics was a cost. The technology required a power source, and the only power source strong enough was the sphere itself. Using the sphere to power human weapons would amplify the beacon signal exponentially, guaranteeing the machines would come faster and in greater numbers. Vasquez realized they were trapped in an impossible choice: remain defenseless or accelerate their own destruction in a desperate bid to be ready when it came. Chapter 3: The Descent into Chaos. The decision to extract energy from the sphere was made without consensus, and the logs suggest Dr. Vasquez bypassed normal protocols to authorize the extraction. Colonel Rain filed an official protest and threatened to report the facility to outside authorities, but communication systems had been experiencing failures for weeks. Whether those failures were technical problems or deliberate sabotage remains unclear. What is clear is that once the extraction began, the sphere's behavior changed dramatically. The geometric light patterns became chaotic, almost violent, and the temperature in the chamber spiked by 40 degrees. Several researchers reported hearing sounds coming from the sphere, not through the air but directly in their minds. Voices speaking in languages that predated human civilization, or perhaps languages that came from somewhere humans had never been. Dr. Webb's final log entry describes the moment the extraction equipment successfully tapped into the sphere's energy core. He writes that the power flow exceeded every prediction, that they had enough energy to power the entire facility for centuries. But he also notes that the sphere began to pulse in rhythm with the extraction, like a heartbeat, like it was alive and aware of what was being done to it. Within minutes of achieving stable energy flow, every computer system in Stella Montis crashed simultaneously. When they rebooted, the systems contained new data, files that no one had created and no one could delete. The files showed images of Earth from space, marked with thousands of red dots converging on a single location. Stella Montis. The beacon had become a target beacon. The personnel logs from the following weeks paint a picture of complete psychological collapse. Dr. Tanaka stopped eating and spent all her time in the sphere chamber, claiming she could understand its language now. She filled notebooks with symbols and equations that made no mathematical sense, but that she insisted were instructions from the sphere. Security reports indicate that at least 15 personnel went missing in the lower levels. Their ID badges, showing them accessing restricted areas, but no visual confirmation of their location. Search parties found abandoned personal effects, clothing and tools, but no bodies. One search team reported finding a section of wall in level 11 that had been carved with thousands of words in dozens of languages, all saying the same thing: they are coming, they are coming, they are coming. Dr. Vasquez's logs become increasingly fragmented and irrational. She writes about dreams where she sees through the eyes of the machines, watching Earth from orbit as a vast fleet prepares to descend. She describes the machines not as invaders, but as harvesters, entities that collect something from worlds, something she can't quite name, but that she knows humans possess. Her last coherent entry suggests she believes the sphere is not a beacon at all, but a test. Civilizations that activate the sphere and use its power prove they're ready for harvesting. Those that recognize the trap and resist prove something else, though she never specifies what. She ends the entry by stating she's going to the sphere chamber one last time to try to shut it down. There are no logs after that date. The final days of Stella Montis are documented only through security footage and automated system reports. The footage shows the sphere chamber filling with the same geometric light patterns, but now they extend beyond the chamber, crawling through the corridors like living things. Personnel flee toward the upper levels, but many turn back, drawn to the light against their will. The automated systems record massive electromagnetic spikes, localized gravitational anomalies, and atmospheric pressure changes that suggest reality itself was becoming unstable around the sphere. The last piece of footage shows Colonel Rain setting explosive charges throughout the facility, while the light patterns chase him through the halls. He reaches the surface level, triggers the detonation sequence, and the camera feed cuts to static. The date on the footage is 3 months before the first confirmed arc sighting. Whatever Stella Montis did, whatever they activated or communicated with, it worked. The machines came. Chapter 4: The Ruins and What Remains. In the current timeline of Ark Raiders, Stella Montis exists as a partially collapsed ruin half buried in the mountainside. The explosions Colonel Rain triggered didn't destroy the facility, but buried large sections under tons of rock and debris. The upper levels are accessible, and that's where players can find most of the data logs and environmental storytelling. The middle levels are heavily damaged, collapsed tunnels, and flooded chambers that make exploration dangerous. The lower levels, where the sphere chamber existed, are almost completely inaccessible. Almost. Certain game areas suggest there are ways down, hidden passages and ventilation shafts that determined players might use to reach the depths. What they would find there is the subject of intense community speculation. The environmental details in Stella Montis tell their own story. Personal effects scattered throughout the living quarters show lives interrupted mid-action. Meals left on tables, beds unmade, photos of families pinned to walls. The research labs contain equipment that appears to have been used in experiments far beyond the facility's official mandate. One lab has what looks like prototype Ark technology, human-made devices that mimic the geometric patterns and energy signatures of the invading machines. Another lab contains biological samples in cryo-storage, tissues that according to the labels were extracted from unidentified organisms. The implication that Stella Montis encountered something biological connected to the Arks raises questions about what the machines really are and whether they're purely mechanical at all. The security officers yield the most disturbing finds. Rain's personal computer contains encrypted files that players can unlock with enough effort. These files reveal that Stella Montis wasn't the first facility to encounter sphere technology. Similar discoveries had been made at 3 other locations across the globe over the previous decade. All 3 facilities went dark before Stella Montis did, losing contact with the outside world and then being found completely abandoned with no signs of struggle or evacuation. Rain's files suggest a pattern, a progression where each facility that activated a sphere brought the Arks closer to full-scale invasion. Stella Montis was the 4th activation, and it was the one that finally triggered the response. The Arks didn't invade Earth randomly. They were called, summoned by humanity's own curiosity and arrogance. One particular area in the ruins has become a focal point for lore hunters, the observation deck on level 3. This room has floor-to-ceiling windows that once overlooked the mountain valley, but now the glass is shattered and the view is obscured by arc structures. Scattered across the floor are dozens of journals, personal diaries kept by various researchers during the final weeks. Reading through them reveals a common theme. Nearly everyone experienced the same progression of symptoms. Vivid dreams about the Arks, compulsive need to be near the sphere, hearing voices in electromagnetic interference, and finally, a sense of peace or acceptance about what was coming. Several journals end with variations of the same phrase. We understand now, we see the pattern, we're part of something larger. This suggests the sphere didn't just broadcast a signal, it infected the researchers with something, altered their perception or consciousness in ways that made them complicit in Earth's invasion. The most significant discovery in the Stella Montis ruins is found in a sealed vault in the administration level. The vault requires specific items scattered throughout the facility to open, and inside is Dr. Vasquez's personal research terminal. This terminal contains her complete private logs, unedited and raw. They reveal that in the final days before the collapse, she successfully established two-way communication with something through the sphere. Not the Arks themselves, but something else. Something she calls the architects. Her logs describe the architects as beings of pure energy or thought that exist between dimensions. They created the spheres as gateways and the Arks as guardians. Worlds that discover the spheres and activate them demonstrate they've reached a technological threshold. The Arks come to harvest those worlds' resources and population, but not to destroy them, to integrate them into a vast network of harvested civilizations spanning the galaxy. Vasquez's last entry states that she's chosen to go willingly, to let the sphere take her, because she believes that by understanding the process from the inside, she might find a way to save humanity. The terminal shows she uploaded her consciousness into the sphere moments before Rain's explosives detonated. Chapter 5: The Implications and Unanswered Questions. Stella Montis points toward a terrifying reality about the Ark invasion. It wasn't random, it wasn't conquest, and it wasn't even really an invasion. Humanity found something it shouldn't have, activated something it didn't understand, and announced its location to forces that treat civilizations like resources to be collected. The sphere technology suggests an intelligence so far beyond human comprehension that our entire species is basically an interesting specimen that reached the right evolutionary point to be worth noticing. Every arc that falls from the sky, every structure they build, every human they take is part of a process that's probably played out on thousands of worlds across millions of years. Earth is just the latest. The connection between Stella Montis and the current state of the war against the arcs is direct. Environmental storytelling in various game areas shows arc structures built on top of or near known sphere locations. They're not just invading, they're securing the spheres, protecting them, or reactivating them. One possible reading of this behavior is that the spheres are collection points, places where the harvested resources, or consciousness, or whatever the architects want, is transferred off-world. Raiders who investigate these areas report strange effects, time distortions, memory gaps, seeing people who aren't there. The spheres are still active, still doing something, and every moment they remain operational brings humanity closer to complete assimilation. Dr. Vasquez's fate remains ambiguous, and that ambiguity is important. Some game assets suggest she might still exist in some form within the sphere network. Audio logs found near arc structures occasionally contain fragments of her voice mixed with arc mechanical sounds, speaking equations, and coordinates that players have used to locate hidden caches of pre-invasion technology. If she successfully uploaded her consciousness and survived the facility's destruction, she might be moving through the sphere network, gathering information, looking for weaknesses. Or she might be completely assimilated, her identity dissolved into the architect's collective intelligence. Either way, her presence, or echo of presence in the game, suggests that human consciousness might be compatible with the sphere technology in ways that could be exploited. The other three facilities mentioned in Rain's files represent potential goldmines of information. If players can locate them, explore their ruins, and recover their research data, they might find patterns or warnings that Stella Montis missed. Each facility would have approached the sphere differently, tried different communication methods, reached different conclusions. Comparing their findings could reveal whether there's a way to use the spheres against the arcs, or to shut them down permanently. The game's map contains several unexplored regions marked with the same electromagnetic anomalies that led to Stella Montis' construction. Those regions likely contain the other facilities, buried and waiting for someone brave or desperate enough to dig them up. The biggest unanswered question hanging over Stella Montis is whether Colonel Rain succeeded in his final mission. His explosive charges were meant to destroy the sphere itself, to eliminate the beacon and stop the signal. But the continued arc presence at the Stella Montis site suggests the sphere survived the detonation, buried under thousands of tons of rock, but still functional. If someone could reach it, access the lower levels and finish what Rain started, it might disrupt the arc operations in that region, or it might trigger something worse. The sphere's response to the extraction attempt showed it was capable of defending itself, of weaponizing its energy in ways the researchers never predicted. Attempting to destroy it now when the arcs are actively using it could result in an explosion that makes Rain's charges look like fireworks. But doing nothing guarantees the harvesting continues unimpeded. Chapter 6. The Technology Legacy. Among the ruins of Stella Montis, scattered throughout the damaged levels, players can find pieces of prototype equipment that the researchers developed in their final weeks. These devices represent humanity's first attempts to reverse engineer arc technology or to create weapons capable of fighting the machines on equal terms. The most common finds are energy cells that use the same power signature as the sphere, capable of charging weapons and equipment far beyond standard capacity. The fact that these cells work, that they're compatible with both pre-invasion human technology and arc technology, suggests a fundamental connection between the sphere energy and the arcs themselves. They're built to use this energy, designed around it, which supports the theory that the architects created both the spheres and the arcs as parts of the same system. One particular weapon prototype found in the Stella Montis armory has become legendary among raiders. It's called the Vasquez rifle in the game files. though no character ever uses that name in dialogue. The weapon fires concentrated beams of the same geometric light patterns the sphere produced, energy that can pierce arc armor and disrupt their core systems. Only a handful of these rifles were built before the facility fell, and they require sphere energy cells to function. The existence of this weapon points toward a crucial realization the researchers had. The spheres aren't just beacons or gateways. They're weapons platforms capable of generating energy that's specifically designed to interact with and potentially damage arc technology. If the spheres can hurt the arcs, then the architects built in a kill switch, a way to stop the machines if necessary. Finding and activating that kill switch becomes the theoretical path to victory. The medical bay in Stella Montis contains research notes on what Dr. Tanaka called sphere sickness, the progressive symptoms that affected personnel exposed to the sphere's emissions. She documented changes in brain activity, particularly increased activity in regions associated with pattern recognition and spatial reasoning. Some subjects developed abilities they didn't have before exposure, enhanced memory, ability to calculate complex equations mentally, and in a few cases, what appeared to be precognitive awareness of arc movements. Tanaka's notes suggest the sphere was rewriting human neural pathways, optimizing consciousness for compatibility with the architect's network. This raises the disturbing possibility that everyone who explores Stella Montis now, every raider who enters the ruins seeking supplies or information, is being exposed to residual sphere emissions. They might be changing, evolving into something that's no longer entirely human. The computer systems in Stella Montis, even damaged and corrupted, contain fragments of the communication protocols the researchers developed to interface with the sphere. These protocols are basically a language, a way to translate human concepts and questions into the geometric patterns the sphere understands and responds to. In theory, anyone with access to these protocols and a functioning sphere could attempt their own communication with the architects. The danger is that the architects now know what happened at Stella Montis, know that humans can be resistant to integration, and might respond to new contact attempts with immediate force rather than the gradual seduction they tried before. But the potential reward, direct negotiation with the intelligence controlling the arcs, could be worth the risk if humanity ever gets desperate enough. The architectural databases in the facility contain complete schematics of Stella Montis, including the sealed lower levels. These schematics reveal something the game's visual design only hints at. The sphere chamber wasn't the deepest point of the facility. Below it, carved into the mountain bedrock, was a 13th level that doesn't appear in any personnel logs or official documentation. This ghost level is marked on the schematics only as contingency, with no details about its purpose or contents. The only access point is a vertical shaft from the sphere chamber, suggesting whatever contingency was, it was meant to be used only if something went catastrophically wrong with the sphere research. Given that everything went catastrophically wrong, the absence of any mention of contingency in the final logs suggests either no one had time to access it, or anyone who did access it never came back to report what they found. Chapter 7. The Survivor Accounts. Outside the game's direct narrative, there are scattered references to Stella Montis survivors, personnel who evacuated before the final collapse, or who were off-site when everything fell apart. These survivors appear in audio logs found in other locations, refugees telling their stories to raider camps or resistance cells. Their accounts don't always match the facility records, which points toward either unreliable memory affected by trauma or deliberate misinformation planted by someone who doesn't want the complete truth about Stella Montis known. One survivor, a maintenance worker named James Holloway, claims he was in the upper levels when the sphere activated its final defense. He describes the light patterns moving through the facility like living creatures, hunting personnel and absorbing them into the walls. He says he watched 20 people walk into the light, willingly, smiling, before he ran for the surface. His account suggests the sphere wasn't just a passive beacon, but an active predator that consumed the researchers to fuel its own operations. Another survivor account comes from a security officer named Maria Santos, who was part of Colonel Rain's final team. She describes Rain as a man who knew exactly what would happen if they failed, who had seen classified reports about the other facilities and understood the pattern. According to Santos, Rain told his team that the explosives were a mercy, that it was better to bury the sphere and everyone still alive in the facility than to let them become part of what was coming. She says Rain gave his team the choice to evacuate or stay and make sure the charges detonated. She chose to leave, and she spent every day since wondering if that makes her a coward or a survivor. Her guilt permeates her account, suggesting that something about leaving Stella Montis marks people in ways that normal trauma doesn't explain. A particularly strange survivor account comes from someone who refuses to give their name and whose story seems almost impossible. This person claims they were Dr. Vasquez's personal assistant and that they were with her in the sphere chamber when she uploaded her consciousness. According to this account, the upload was successful but incomplete. Vasquez's physical body remained behind, comatose but alive, and the assistant helped several others evacuate her body to a secure location before the explosives detonated. This account claims that Vasquez still exists in two states simultaneously, her consciousness distributed through the sphere network, and her body maintained in a medical facility somewhere on Earth. The implications are staggering. If Vasquez's body is still alive, still connected to the sphere network through quantum entanglement or something even stranger, she could potentially be brought back, her consciousness downloaded from the network into her original form. She would have years of experience navigating the Architect's systems, invaluable intelligence about Ark operations, and possibly the key to ending the invasion. Not all survivor accounts are from Stella Montis personnel. Several raiders report encountering something near the ruins that they describe as ghosts or echoes. These entities appear as translucent figures that move through the facility doing mundane tasks, reading terminals, adjusting equipment, walking patrol routes. The entities don't interact with living people and seem unaware of the facility's current state. One theory is these are psychic imprints, recorded memories embedded in the sphere's energy field and playing back on loop. Another theory suggests they're the consciousness of researchers who are absorbed into the sphere, fragments of their minds still trying to complete their final tasks, even though their bodies are long gone. A few raiders claim the entities can be communicated with if you use the right equipment, that they'll share information about the facility or warn of dangers in the lower levels. Whether these claims are genuine or just trauma-induced hallucinations remains unverified. The most recent survivor account comes from a raider team that attempted to reach the lower levels 6 months ago. Only one member returned, and their report is fragmentary and confused. They claim the team found an intact section of Level 11, areas that somehow escaped the collapse and the Ark occupation. In these sections, the facility's automated systems were still functioning, lights and computers, and even the climate control. The team found research notes dated weeks after the official collapse, suggesting someone, or something, continued working in Stella Montis long after it was abandoned. The notes described successful communication with entities called the Returned, former researchers who had been absorbed into the sphere and then somehow extracted back into physical form. The notes claimed these returned individuals possessed knowledge and abilities far beyond human norms, that they could interface with Ark technology directly, and that they were building something in the depths of the facility. The survivors' report ends abruptly with a description of seeing Dr. Vasquez walking toward them down a corridor, unchanged from her pre-collapse appearance except for geometric patterns glowing beneath her skin. The survivor ran and didn't stop until they reached the surface. Chapter 8. The Ongoing Mystery. Stella Montis remains one of the most dangerous and contested locations in Ark raiders. The facility's ruins are constantly patrolled by Ark machines, which suggests they consider the site strategically important. But the Arks don't destroy the ruins or bury them completely. They maintain them, almost preserve them, which points toward the facility still serving some purpose in their operations. Several raider teams have observed Arks entering the ruins, carrying objects or materials, and emerging hours later with nothing. The implication is they're depositing something in the lower levels, perhaps feeding the sphere or building something around it. Whatever the Arks are doing in Stella Montis, they're committed to it, dedicating resources that could be used elsewhere in the war. Recent game updates have added new audio logs near Stella Montis that suggest a coordinated effort is underway to reach the sphere chamber. Multiple raider factions, resistance cells, and even some former government elements have pooled their information and resources. They believe that if they can access the sphere, they can use Dr. Vasquez's communication protocols to either shut down the beacon or weaponize it against the arcs. The plan is ambitious and probably suicidal, but it's motivated by the same desperate logic that drove Vasquez's original decisions. Doing nothing guarantees humanity's eventual defeat. Taking massive risks opens the possibility, however slim, of finding an advantage. The audio logs discuss forming a strike team of the best raiders equipped with prototype weapons from Stella Montis to fight their way to the lower levels and complete the mission. The community around Arc Raiders has developed extensive theories about what completing this mission might reveal. Some believe the sphere contains the architects themselves in dormant form, that the geometric intelligence guiding the arcs is physically present in every sphere and vulnerable to attack if reached. Others think the spheres are actually prisons, containment systems holding something the architects feared, and that the Ark invasion is a quarantine operation to prevent that imprisoned force from escaping. A few theories suggest the spheres are seeds, the first stage of terraforming operations that will eventually transform Earth into something compatible with the architect's existence. Each theory leads to different implications for what destroying or controlling a sphere might accomplish, ranging from ending the invasion to making it exponentially worse. The developers have remained deliberately vague about what's canon and what's speculation, which is probably the right choice for an ongoing game. They've added environmental details and logs that support multiple interpretations, allowing players to build their own understanding of the lore. But certain patterns emerge from all the official content. The spheres are gateways, connections to somewhere else. The arcs are tools, sophisticated machines, but still just tools, serving a larger purpose. Humanity activated something it can't deactivate, and now survival depends on understanding the system well enough to exploit its weaknesses. Stella Montis represents both the source of humanity's current nightmare and potentially the key to ending it. Every answer found in the ruins generates 3 new questions, which is exactly how this kind of mystery should function. The Stella Montis narrative also serves as a mirror for player actions in the game. Just like the researchers, players are exploring dangerous technology, taking risks in pursuit of power, trying to understand forces that might be fundamentally incomprehensible. The game asks whether humanity's defining trait is curiosity or recklessness, whether pushing boundaries is heroic or catastrophic. Dr. Vasquez believed knowledge was worth any cost, that understanding the sphere justified every risk. Colonel Rain believed some doors should stay closed, that survival sometimes means accepting ignorance. Both perspectives led to death and destruction. Maybe the real answer is somewhere between them, a careful balance of exploration and restraint that humanity hasn't figured out yet. Or maybe humanity is incapable of that balance. Maybe we're a species that will always choose to open Pandora's box and hope we can handle what comes out. Stella Montis suggests we usually can't, but we keep trying anyway. Chapter 9. The Sphere Network Theory. One aspect of Stella Montis that deserves deeper examination is how it fits into the larger sphere network. The data recovered from Colonel Rain's encrypted files mentioned 3 other facilities that encountered sphere technology before Stella Montis, but scattered references throughout the game suggest the actual number might be much higher. Environmental clues in various regions show geological formations with the same electromagnetic signatures, ancient excavation sites that were mysteriously abandoned, and corporate research stations that went offline without explanation. If you map these locations based on coordinates found in data logs across multiple game areas, a pattern emerges. The spheres are distributed across Earth in a geometric formation, specifically positioned at points that form a 3-dimensional lattice when viewed from orbit. This isn't random placement. Someone or something positioned these spheres with mathematical precision, probably millions of years before humans evolved. The lattice pattern suggests the spheres function as nodes in a planetary scale system. Each sphere connects to multiple others, creating a web that spans the entire globe. When one sphere activates, it sends signals through the network to all the others. When Stella Montis powered up their sphere and began extraction, they weren't just broadcasting into space. They were activating the entire network, waking up every dormant sphere on Earth simultaneously. This explains why the Ark invasion wasn't localized to Scandinavia, but instead appeared globally within weeks of Stella Montis' collapse. The activation threshold required multiple spheres to be found and studied, but Stella Montis was the critical node that completed the circuit. They were the fourth facility to activate a sphere, and 4 apparently was the minimum number needed to trigger the full network response. Dr. Webb's physics notes contain equations that attempt to model how the sphere network functions. His calculations suggest the spheres don't just communicate through electromagnetic radiation, but through quantum entanglement, meaning they're connected across dimensions or through space-time in ways that bypass normal physics. Information shared with one sphere is instantly available to all spheres, regardless of distance. This has terrifying implications for the current war. Every time raiders interact with arc technology, every time they recover sphere energy cells or use prototype weapons, they're potentially feeding information back into the network. The architects know what humanity is doing, know what weapons are being developed, know where resistance is organizing. The war might already be lost simply because humanity can't stop using the technology that monitors and reports on them. The quantum entanglement theory also explains something strange about arc behavior near sphere sites. Arcs operating near active or dormant spheres demonstrate coordination that seems impossible given their distance from each other and the electromagnetic interference of combat. They anticipate raider tactics before they're executed, respond to threats that haven't materialized yet, and retreat from positions moments before artillery strikes land. If the spheres connect the arcs to a real-time tactical network that processes battlefield data faster than human consciousness can perceive, then every fight near a sphere is fundamentally unwinnable. The arcs aren't just seeing the present battlefield, they're seeing probability clouds of future battlefield states and choosing the timeline where they win. Humanity is fighting an enemy that experiences time differently, that can iterate through thousands of tactical options in seconds and select optimal outcomes. But the network has a weakness, and it's the same weakness that most networks have. Redundancy creates resilience, but also creates dependencies. If the spheres are nodes that distribute processing power and information, then destroying enough nodes could degrade the network's functionality. The network might be designed to lose some percentage of nodes without total failure, maybe even designed to lose half its nodes and still operate. But there's a threshold, a critical minimum below which the system can't maintain coherence. Find that threshold, destroy that many spheres, and the arc invasion might collapse as the machines lose their coordination and tactical advantage. The problem is determining how many spheres exist on Earth and where they all are. Stella Montis and the 3 facilities mentioned by Rain make 4. The lattice pattern suggests there should be at least 12 for full global coverage, possibly more. Finding and destroying 8 to 10 massive underground spheres while fighting a technologically superior enemy that's actively defending those spheres is a military objective that borders on impossible. But impossible is different from definitively impossible, and desperate times have a way of making the impossible merely extremely unlikely. Chapter 10. The Human Element. Beyond the technology and cosmic horror, Stella Montis is ultimately a story about people making choices with incomplete information and suffering the consequences. Dr. Elena Vasquez could have listened to Colonel Rain, could have evacuated the facility after decoding the sphere's warning, could have destroyed her research and buried everything. She chose knowledge instead, chose to believe that understanding was humanity's best weapon. That choice killed everyone in Stella Montis and possibly doomed Earth. But it also gave humanity the communication protocols, the prototype weapons, and the fundamental understanding of what the arcs are and why they came. Without Vasquez's research, humanity would be fighting completely blind, dying without even knowing what killed them. Whether her legacy is heroism or catastrophic hubris depends entirely on whether humanity survives the next few years. Colonel David Rain represents the opposite impulse, the instinct toward caution and preservation. He recognized the danger early, advocated for containment instead of experimentation, and when containment failed, he chose destruction over risk. His final act, burying Stella Montis under explosives, was meant to deny the arcs their sphere and prevent further damage. It failed, but not because Rain was wrong about the danger. It failed because the danger was already so much larger than anyone realized, because the network was already active and his local action couldn't affect the global situation. Rain's tragedy is dying believing his sacrifice mattered, when in reality, The war was already starting on 12 fronts simultaneously. But his documentation, his encrypted warnings, his security protocols have saved countless raider lives by preparing them for what they'd face. He might have failed to save Earth, but he succeeded in arming the resistance with knowledge they desperately needed. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's story is perhaps the most disturbing because her fate remains ambiguous. Her logs show someone losing grip on sanity while simultaneously gaining insights that seem almost supernatural. She claimed to understand the sphere's language, to hear the architects speaking directly to her, to see the mathematical structure underlying reality. Her notebooks are filled with equations that make no sense by conventional physics, but that some radar scientists claim actually predict arc behavior with uncomfortable accuracy. If Tanaka went insane, then her insights are just the ravings of a broken mind. If she actually made contact with something real, if the architects genuinely communicated with her, then she represents a bridge between human and alien consciousness. The game leaves both possibilities open. Some environmental storytelling suggests Tanaka was among those who walked into the sphere's light willingly and was absorbed. Other clues hint that she might have survived, might be one of the returned that recent survivor accounts mention. Still alive somewhere with geometric patterns glowing beneath her skin and knowledge that could change everything. The junior researchers, security personnel, and support staff at Stella Montis were victims of decisions made above their clearance level. Most of them probably didn't know what the sphere was or what activating it meant. They just showed up for their jobs, did their assigned tasks, and died, or worse, without understanding why. Their personal logs show ordinary human concerns right up until the end. Worried about relationships, complaining about the cafeteria food, planning what they'd do on their next leave. Then the entries stop abruptly or transition into confused descriptions of lights and voices and overwhelming compulsions. These people deserved better, deserved to be protected by leadership that recognized when to stop pushing boundaries. But humanity as a species isn't great at protecting the vulnerable when there's knowledge to be gained or power to be seized. Stella Montis is just a concentrated example of a pattern that's played out across human history. Someone else says, "We should be careful," and the drive to know always wins until it kills everyone involved. The survivor accounts point toward a different kind of tragedy, the burden of living with knowledge that nobody else believes or cares about. James Holloway, Maria Santos, and the unnamed assistant all tried to warn people about what happened at Stella Montis and what it meant for humanity's future. They were dismissed as traumatized, unreliable, suffering from hallucinations induced by sphere exposure. By the time the arcs arrived and proved them right, it was too late to prepare. They've spent years watching humanity stumble into the same mistakes Stella Montis made, watching raiders use sphere energy weapons without understanding the cost, watching resistance leaders plan assaults on sphere sites without recognizing the strategic trap. The survivors are prophets nobody listens to, and that isolation might be worse than dying in the initial collapse. At least the dead don't have to watch everything they warned about come true. Chapter 11. The Architect's Perspective. One question the game never explicitly answers, but constantly circles around, is what the architects actually want. They're described as beings of pure energy or thought, intelligence so advanced that humanity is basically bacteria in comparison. But intelligence that advanced wouldn't need to harvest worlds or integrate civilizations. They would have moved beyond material concerns entirely, beyond even concepts like growth or expansion. Unless their motivations are so alien that human frameworks can't encompass them. Dr. Vasquez's final logs suggest she glimpsed something of their perspective during her communication attempts, and what she glimpsed terrified her more than the arcs themselves. She wrote that the architects don't see civilizations as alive in any meaningful way. They see patterns, information structures that emerge from planetary chemistry and evolve toward complexity. To them, harvesting a civilization is like a human collecting bacteria samples. Not malicious, not cruel, just categorization and study. But there's another interpretation buried in Dr. Tanaka's incomprehensible notebooks. Some radar scientists who've studied her equations believe she was trying to describe a concept that doesn't translate well into human language, something about entropy and consciousness and universal heat death. The theory goes that the architects are desperately trying to preserve information against the inevitable ending of the universe. Every civilization that reaches technological sophistication represents a unique pattern, a configuration of matter and energy and thought that has never existed before and will never exist again once that civilization dies. By harvesting civilizations, uploading their consciousness and technology and culture into the sphere network, the architects are building an archive. When the universe finally collapses into thermodynamic equilibrium and all stars burn out and all matter decays, the sphere network will remain, a repository of every civilization that ever existed. Humanity's forced integration isn't destruction, it's preservation. Will exist forever in the architect's library, patterns frozen in quantum states that outlast reality itself. If this interpretation is accurate, it raises profound philosophical questions about identity and existence. Is a civilization that's been absorbed into the sphere network still that civilization? Or is it just a recording, a static copy with no genuine continuity? If consciousness can be uploaded and stored indefinitely, does death lose meaning entirely? The researchers at Stella Montis who walked into the sphere's light might not be dead at all. They might exist now in a state humans can barely conceptualize, distributed across the network, experiencing reality from perspectives that span galaxies and timelines. Dr. Vasquez might be more alive now than she ever was in her biological body, thinking thoughts that would shatter a human mind, solving equations that describe dimensions physics hasn't discovered. Or she might be completely gone, her consciousness dissolved into component information with no coherent self remaining. The game doesn't answer this, and maybe it can't be answered without experiencing it personally. The arcs themselves might be victims of the architects rather than servants. If the sphere network preserves consciousness, then every arc machine might contain uploaded minds from civilizations that were harvested in the distant past. They're not robots following programming, they're enslaved consciousnesses, forced to enact the harvest on new worlds, trapped in mechanical bodies and compelled by the architects to perpetuate the cycle. This would explain why arcs sometimes behave in ways that seem almost regretful, why they occasionally spare certain humans for no obvious tactical reason, why damaged arcs emit sounds that analysis suggests might be screaming. They're trying to warn humanity, trying to communicate that fighting back is the only option, that being harvested is a fate worth dying to avoid. But they can't communicate clearly because the architects control them, limit their ability to rebel or deviate from their assigned functions. Every arc that raiders destroy might actually be a mercy killing, releasing an enslaved consciousness from millions of years of forced servitude. Alternatively, the architects might be completely indifferent to human concepts like morality or suffering. They might operate on principles so removed from biological existence that attributing motivations to them is meaningless. They harvest civilizations because that's what they do, the same way gravity pulls mass together, or entropy increases over time. It's not a choice, not a plan, just the nature of what they are. Fighting them would be like fighting a natural law, resistance that's brave, but ultimately futile because you're not opposing an enemy, but a fundamental property of how the universe functions at scales humans can't perceive. This interpretation is the bleakest because it removes any possibility of negotiation or understanding. You can't reason with a force of nature. You can only adapt or die. And humanity isn't great at adaptation when it requires accepting that we're not special, not important, just one more pattern in an infinite series of patterns that will all eventually be collected and stored. Chapter 12. Tactical Applications. Setting aside the existential horror, Stella Montis provides concrete tactical information that raiders can use right now. The prototype weapons recovered from the armory prove that sphere energy can damage arcs more effectively than conventional weapons. This has led to a desperate industry of raider engineers trying to reverse engineer the Vasquez rifle and similar devices. The challenge is power supply. Sphere energy cells have limited charges and can't be recharged with normal electricity. They have to be exposed to active sphere emissions, which means returning to sites like Stella Montis where arcs patrol heavily. Every weapon's cache comes at the cost of multiple raider lives, but the calculation is brutal and simple. 10 raiders die, securing enough energy cells to equip 50 with superior weapons. Those 50 can now accomplish missions that would have required 200 with conventional equipment. The math is favorable, even if the moral weight is crushing. The communication protocols Vasquez developed represent another tactical asset, though using them is incredibly risky. Several radar tech specialists have experimented with the protocols, attempting to establish contact with nearby spheres, or even with arc machines directly. Results are mixed, and often catastrophic. Some attempts result in arcs going dormant or retreating from an area, suggesting the protocols can confuse or temporarily disable their coordination. Other attempts trigger immediate and overwhelming arc response, entire fleets converging on the transmission location, as if the protocols represent a threat the arcs are programmed to eliminate. The current theory is that the protocols work, but that the architects have learned to recognize their use and dispatch arcs to stop anyone from establishing meaningful communication. If this theory is correct, it means the architects are afraid of dialogue, afraid that, given the chance to communicate, humanity might find leverage or reveal flaws in the harvest operation. The medical research on sphere sickness has led to an uncomfortable discovery. Long-term exposure to sphere emissions does alter human brain chemistry and neural structure, but not always negatively. Some raiders who've spent extensive time near sphere sites develop enhanced cognitive abilities, pattern recognition that borders on precognition, and ability to interface with arc technology in ways that shouldn't be possible. These individuals are valuable assets, but also security risks. As they change, their loyalty becomes questionable. Are they still human, still committed to humanity's survival, or are they transitioning into something else, something more aligned with the architect's goals? Several such individuals have disappeared from raider camps, last seen walking towards sphere sites alone at night. Whether they were compelled by the sphere's influence or chose to go willingly remains unclear. Either way, the resistance has lost valuable operatives to whatever the spheres are doing to human consciousness. The architectural knowledge of Stella Montis' layout has been shared across radar networks, providing a template for what to expect at other sphere sites. If the architects use consistent construction methods, then any facility built around a sphere will have similar features: deep underground chambers, redundant power systems, multiple security barriers, and that mysterious 13th level marked contingency. Raiders planning assaults on other sphere sites use the Stella Montis template to predict where defenders will concentrate, where critical systems might be located, and where the sphere itself is most vulnerable. This shared knowledge has made sphere site operations less suicidal, but only marginally. The arcs have also adapted, reinforcing locations that match the Stella Montis layout and constructing new defensive structures that don't match any human architectural logic. It's an arms race of information where both sides learn from every engagement and adjust their strategies accordingly. The most significant tactical application, still theoretical, but being actively pursued, is using captured sphere energy to power a weapon capable of destroying spheres from the inside. If spheres are quantum-entangled nodes in a network, then introducing a specific type of energy disruption into one node should cascade through the network to all connected nodes. It's the digital equivalent of a virus, malicious code inserted at one point that propagates throughout a system. The weapon design exists in Dr. Webb's recovered notes, but building it requires resources and expertise that are in desperately short supply. Several raider factions are racing to construct the first prototype, knowing that whoever succeeds controls potentially the most important weapon in the war. The catch is that the weapon has to be deployed from inside a sphere chamber, meaning someone has to fight their way into the heart of an arc-defended facility, survive long enough to activate the device, and probably die when it detonates, because the energy release will be apocalyptic. It's a suicide mission, but the volunteers keep stepping forward because destroying the sphere network might be humanity's only chance. Chapter 13, the 13th level beneath Stella Montis, has become the subject of intense speculation and several disastrous expeditions. Based on the architectural schematics, this level is accessed only through the sphere chamber, down a vertical shaft that descends another 100 meters into the mountain bedrock. The schematic shows the level is small, just a single large room, but it's marked with engineering symbols that suggest extreme structural reinforcement and environmental isolation. Whatever contingency was designed to contain or house, the builders wanted it separated from everything else in the facility. The absence of any personnel logs mentioning this level suggests it was classified beyond even the highest security clearances. Dr. Vasquez, Colonel Rain, and the other senior staff either didn't know it existed or were forbidden from discussing it. Recent raider expeditions to Stella Montis have focused on reaching this 13th level. The sphere chamber is buried under tons of collapsed rock from Rain's explosives, but the vertical shaft might still be accessible if you can navigate the damaged lower levels and approach from below through maintenance tunnels. 3 separate teams have attempted this route in the past year. The first team lost contact after reporting they'd found the shaft entrance. The second team returned, but refused to discuss what they encountered, exhibiting symptoms consistent with severe psychological trauma. The third team never returned at all, but their helmet cameras transmitted fragmented footage before the signal cut out. The footage shows them descending the shaft using climbing equipment, emerging into a chamber that appears completely undamaged despite being directly below the collapsed sphere chamber. The walls of the contingency level are lined with equipment that doesn't match any known human or Ark technology. Crystalline structures pulsing with light, and in the center of the chamber is something the footage can't quite capture clearly. The image distorts and pixelates whenever the camera focuses on the central object, as if whatever is there exists partially outside normal space. The last transmitted frame shows one team member reaching toward the object, and then the feed goes black. Theories about what contingency contains range from plausible to absurd. The most conservative theory is that it's a failsafe, a weapon designed to destroy the sphere if it ever became necessary. This would make sense given the level of security and secrecy. If sphere research went wrong, someone with proper authorization could descend to contingency and activate whatever's stored there to neutralize the threat. But this theory doesn't explain why Rain didn't mention it in his final logs, why he chose explosives over a purpose-built failsafe. Unless he didn't have the authorization codes, or the failsafe required something Rain couldn't provide, like a living sacrifice or willing consciousness upload. More exotic theories suggest contingency contains another sphere, a backup or control node that can override the primary sphere's functions. If 2 spheres exist at Stella Montis, destroying one might trigger the other to activate, creating a redundant system that ensures the network node remains operational. The darkest theory proposes that contingency doesn't contain a weapon or technology at all. It contains the original discoverer of the sphere, the first human who made contact with the architects millions of years ago. According to this theory, spheres have been on Earth far longer than anyone realizes, buried and dormant, but occasionally discovered by ancient civilizations. One of those civilizations, maybe human, maybe something before humans, found the Stella Montis sphere and made the same mistakes modern researchers did. They established communication, they were absorbed, but one individual resisted the upload. They were trapped between states, neither fully absorbed nor fully free, and subsequent discoverers of the sphere imprisoned them in contingency as a warning or containment. If this theory is true, then the entity in contingency has been aware and alone for thousands or millions of years, mad beyond any human concept of madness, waiting for someone to descend the shaft and make contact. Whatever is in contingency, the architects want it protected or contained. Arc presence at Stella Montis isn't evenly distributed across the ruins. The heaviest concentrations are always positioned above the sphere chamber, and by extension, above contingency. They're not just guarding the sphere, they're guarding what's beneath it. Several raiders have observed arcs apparently excavating the collapsed sections, carefully removing rubble to create access routes deeper into the facility. But these excavations stop at level 12, never proceeding down the shaft to contingency. Either the arcs can't access that level for some reason, or they're under orders not to. The implications are significant. If the architects fear whatever is in contingency enough to keep their machines away from it, then humanity should probably fear it too. Or humanity should recognize it as a potential weapon, something so dangerous that even godlike entities won't touch it. Chapter 14. The Price of Knowledge. Looking at Stella Montis from a meta perspective, it functions as a cautionary tale about the cost of curiosity. Every major advance in human history came from someone pushing boundaries and taking risks with unknown phenomena. Fire, agriculture, metallurgy, electricity, nuclear power, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence. Each breakthrough started with someone experimenting with forces they didn't fully understand and accepting the possibility of catastrophic failure. Most of the time, we survive the risks and benefit from the knowledge. Sometimes we don't, and entire civilizations collapse from their own innovations. The sphere technology represents the ultimate version of this dynamic. Humanity found something that offered incredible power and incredible understanding, and we couldn't resist activating it even though we had warnings it might kill us. Dr. Vasquez made the choice that humans have always made. Knowledge now, consequences later. The question the game leaves deliberately unanswered is whether Vasquez was wrong. In a universe without the architects and the arcs, her decision would be purely heroic. She sacrificed herself and her facility to unlock revolutionary technology that could have solved humanity's energy crisis and propelled civilization to new heights. In a universe with the architects, her decision triggered an invasion that might extinct humanity. But is there a possible timeline where knowing about the spheres and the architects makes humanity stronger in the long run, where the knowledge she died to preserve becomes the key to ultimate victory? If humanity survives the Ark invasion by using technology derived from Vasquez's research, does that posthumously justify her choices? Or are consequences binary, either you win or you don't, and the reasoning behind your decisions is just narrative humans create to make sense of chaos? Colonel Rain's perspective offers a counterpoint. Some knowledge is too dangerous to pursue, some boundaries should remain uncrossed, and survival sometimes requires accepting limits. Humanity existed for millennia without sphere technology and managed fine. There's no objective reason we needed to understand the spheres or harness their power. Curiosity alone drove the research, the desire to know simply because we could know. Rain recognized this and argued for restraint, for acknowledging that just because we can investigate something doesn't mean we should. His position is fundamentally conservative in the philosophical sense, valuing preservation of what exists over risky pursuit of what might be. If humanity had listened to Rain, we'd still be struggling with energy shortages and climate change, but we wouldn't be fighting extinction against alien machines. Whether that trade-off is acceptable depends entirely on your values and priorities. The researchers who walked into the sphere's light made a third choice, accepting transformation and integration with the architect's network. From their perspective, assuming they retained enough individuality to have perspectives, they transcended human limitations entirely. They're not dead, they're evolved, upgraded, expanded into forms of consciousness that biological humans can't comprehend. The fact that this transformation was forced doesn't necessarily make it wrong if the result is genuinely superior existence. Maybe the architects are offering humanity a gift, violently imposed, but still a gift, and resistance is just instinctive fear of change. Maybe centuries from now, historians, or whatever passes for historians in the post-human future, will look back at Stella Montis as the moment humanity began its metamorphosis into something greater. Or maybe that's just how the architects want us to think, mental conditioning embedded in the sphere's influence to make absorption seem appealing. The game doesn't resolve this, because it probably can't be resolved while humanity is still fighting. Personal logs from multiple researchers show a common pattern in their final days. They started questioning whether individual consciousness mattered, whether preserving humanity as it currently exists is worth the suffering that preservation requires. If the architects can truly store consciousness indefinitely and grant effective immortality, is that worse than the inevitable heat death of the universe? Humans live 60 to 80 years if lucky, experience tiny fragments of existence, and then vanish forever. The sphere network offers billions of years of existence, access to knowledge and experiences across all harvested civilizations. From a purely utilitarian calculation, individual short-term suffering during harvest might be infinitesimally small compared to the long-term benefit of joining the network. These researchers convinced themselves that resistance was selfish, clinging to biological existence out of irrational fear, and that the compassionate choice was accepting integration. Whether they were right or just mentally compromised by sphere exposure remains ambiguous, and that ambiguity is probably the point the game wants to make about moral certainty in extreme circumstances. Chapter 15: Future Implications. the Stella Montis story isn't finished. Current game updates continue adding environmental storytelling and data logs that expand on what happened at the facility and what it means for ongoing operations. There are strong hints that a major content update will focus on a large-scale raider assault on Stella Montis, attempting to reach the sphere chamber, and possibly contingency. This would give players direct access to areas that currently only exist in lore and screenshots. What they find there could fundamentally shift understanding of the Ark invasion and humanity's options for fighting back. Developers have teased that player choices during this assault will have consequences, suggesting branching outcomes where different approaches lead to different revelations or different tactical advantages for future content. One likely direction is revealing more about the other sphere sites and their fates. If Stella Montis was the fourth facility to activate a sphere, what happened at the first three? Were they abandoned peacefully? Did they suffer similar collapses? Or did something even worse occur? Each facility would have approached the sphere differently, made different choices, learned different lessons. Compiling all their research could provide a comprehensive understanding of sphere mechanics and architect behavior that no single facility achieved. The game could expand into a globe-trotting campaign where players visit each historical sphere site, recover their data, and piece together the complete picture. Some sites might still have survivors or entities like the Returned, offering new perspectives on what integration with the network actually means for human consciousness. Another possibility is introducing a faction of humanity that actively supports the architects and the harvest. Not everyone resists integration. Some people, when faced with the inevitability of Ark victory, might choose to cooperate with the harvest in exchange for favorable treatment or preservation of their consciousness. These collaborators could form a competing faction that opposes raiders, viewing them as primitives fighting against evolution. Stella Montis researchers, who were absorbed but retained coherent identity, could return as antagonists, trying to convince humanity to accept the network rather than die resisting it. This would complicate the moral landscape of the game, introducing shades of grey where currently it's mostly humans versus machines. Fighting other humans who've made different calculations about survival is messier and more emotionally difficult than fighting Arks. The contingency level specifically seems designed to be a major reveal in future content. The amount of mystery and build-up around it suggests whatever is stored there is significant enough to change the entire strategic situation. It could be a superweapon capable of destroying the sphere network, a communication device that allows direct negotiation with the architects, or something completely unexpected that recontextualizes everything players thought they knew. The developers have a history of subverting expectations, so the most likely outcome is something nobody has theorized correctly yet. Whatever contingency contains, accessing it will probably require cooperation between multiple raider factions, forcing players to set aside smaller conflicts to pursue the larger goal of human survival. Long-term, the Stella Montis narrative points toward an endgame where humanity has to make a species-wide choice, accept integration, and join the sphere network, gaining immortality and cosmic knowledge at the cost of individual biological existence. Or fight to preserve humanity as it currently exists, accepting that this means eventual death for every individual and probable extinction for the species as a whole. There might be a third option, some middle path that the game hasn't revealed yet, but the binary choice feels thematically appropriate. Every person who entered the sphere at Stella Montis faced that choice individually, and their decisions destroyed them because there was no consensus. If humanity can unify behind a single choice, maybe that unity itself becomes the key to survival. Or maybe there is no good choice, no path that leads anywhere except different forms of defeat, and the only victory is making the choice on our own terms rather than having it forced on us. That would be a bleaker ending, but it would be honest about how these situations usually resolve in reality versus fiction. Chapter 16: The Architect's Failed Experiments. Something that gets overlooked in most discussions about Stella Montis is evidence suggesting the facility wasn't the architect's first attempt at harvesting Earth. Scattered throughout Dr. Tanaka's notebooks are references to precursor events, geological anomalies that predate human civilization by millions of years. She describes finding crystalline formations in core samples taken from beneath the sphere chamber, formations that match the composition of arc armor, but degraded by time. The dating puts these formations at roughly 65 million years old, suspiciously close to the extinction event that killed the dinosaurs. Tanaka's theory, sketched out in increasingly frantic handwriting across dozens of pages, suggests the architects tried harvesting Earth before, that the dinosaurs, or whatever intelligent species might have existed alongside them, activated ancient spheres, and that the resulting harvest failed catastrophically. The KT extinction event wiped out most life on Earth in a geological instant. Standard scientific consensus blames an asteroid impact, and there's solid evidence supporting that explanation. But Tanaka found something else in the deep geological record. Layers of sediment containing exotic particles that don't occur naturally on Earth, particles with the same quantum signature as sphere energy. Her interpretation is that the ancient harvest went wrong, that either the architects miscalculated Earth's biosphere stability, or something about that harvest triggered defensive responses they didn't anticipate. The extinction event might have been a deliberate reset, the architects purging Earth's surface to eliminate whatever complications arose during that first harvest attempt. Then they left the spheres dormant, waiting for the planet to recover and develop new intelligent life that could try again. If this theory holds, humanity isn't the architect's target. We're their second attempt at harvesting whatever Earth uniquely produces. The first attempt failed 65 million years ago, killed most life on the planet, and taught the architects something about how to approach Earth differently. The long dormancy period allowed evolution to create new intelligent species, new configurations of consciousness and civilization that might succeed where the previous attempt failed. Every sphere on Earth has been waiting, patient beyond human comprehension, for biological intelligence to re-emerge and develop technology sophisticated enough to find and activate them. We're not victims of random cosmic predation. We're part of a deliberate experiment spanning geological timescales, variables being tested by entities that measure success in millions of years. This perspective reframes everything about Stella Montis. The researchers weren't making first contact with alien intelligence. They were completing a cycle that began before mammals existed, fulfilling a role that the spheres had been designed to invoke across vast stretches of time. Dr. Vasquez's choice to communicate with the sphere wasn't really her choice at all. The sphere was built to be discovered, built to be irresistible to curious, intelligent beings, built to trigger exactly the sequence of events that played out at Stella Montis. Humanity's supposed free will in choosing to activate the sphere is an illusion. The architects designed a trap so sophisticated that species caught in it genuinely believe they're making independent decisions. We congratulate ourselves on scientific curiosity and pursuit of knowledge while walking exactly the path the architects laid out millions of years before humans evolved. The evidence for failed previous harvests exists at other sphere sites too, though it takes careful analysis to recognize. Several radar geologists have reported finding similar anomalies in rock strata near suspected sphere locations, ancient burn marks that suggest catastrophic energy releases, fossilized remains that show signs of geometric patterning inconsistent with natural decomposition, and in one case, what appears to be a fossilized arc component embedded in rock layers that date back hundreds of millions of years. The architects have been trying to harvest Earth repeatedly across the planet's history, and each attempt has ended in extinction events that reset the biosphere. Humanity is just the latest iteration, and there's no reason to believe our attempt will succeed where previous ones failed, unless we can figure out what went wrong before and avoid repeating it. Chapter 17. The Consciousness Transfer Technology. One aspect of Stella Montis that deserves careful examination is the actual mechanism of consciousness transfer into the sphere network. Dr. Vasquez's successful upload of her consciousness suggests the technology exists and functions, but the process is barely documented. Her final logs mention preparing her physical body for the transfer, using specialized equipment in the sphere chamber that interfaced with both human neural tissue and the sphere's energy field. The equipment created what she called a resonance bridge, synchronizing her brain's electrical patterns with the sphere's quantum oscillations until the boundary between them dissolved. At that point, her consciousness didn't transfer so much as expand, existing simultaneously in biological and quantum substrates before the biological components shut down. What makes this process particularly disturbing is that it's apparently reversible, or at least partially reversible. The reports of returned individuals, former researchers who were absorbed into the sphere and then somehow extracted back into physical form, suggest consciousness can move in both directions across the bridge. But the returned individuals aren't quite human anymore. Multiple accounts describe them as having geometric patterns glowing beneath their skin, eyes that reflect light in ways human eyes shouldn't, and the ability to interface directly with ARC technology through touch. They speak in fragmented sentences that jump between topics as if they're processing multiple conversation threads simultaneously. Their behavior suggests they're not fully present in physical reality. That part of their consciousness remains connected to the sphere network, even while they inhabit biological bodies. The technology required for consciousness transfer apparently existed at Stella Montis before the researchers discovered the sphere. Equipment manifests show that specialized neural interface devices were shipped to the facility during its construction phase, months before the sphere chamber was discovered. This suggests someone knew what they would find, that the facility was built specifically to study consciousness transfer technology, and the sphere's discovery was expected or even engineered. Corporate records show the project's funding came from a consortium of biotech companies with heavy investment in neuroscience and life extension research. They weren't interested in geothermal energy at all. They wanted access to the sphere, wanted to study its consciousness transfer mechanisms, and used the geothermal project as cover for research that governments would never have approved openly. This premeditation raises disturbing questions about how much control humanity actually has over the situation. If the corporate sponsors knew about the sphere before construction started, then someone told them where to look and what they would find. That someone could be remnants of previous civilizations that encountered spheres and survived by passing information forward through history. Or it could be the architects themselves, manipulating humanity through planted information and economic incentives to build facilities exactly where the spheres are located. Every step toward discovering and activating the spheres might be guided by invisible hands. Free will systematically eliminated through manipulation, so subtle that victims never realize they're being controlled. Stella Montis researchers thought they were pioneering breakthrough technology when they might have been performing exactly according to a script written millions of years before they were born. The consciousness transfer process also explains why the architects need biological civilizations. Pure energy beings like themselves can't generate the specific type of consciousness that biological evolution produces. There's something about existing in time-limited physical bodies, about experiencing reality through sensory inputs that decay and fail, about knowing death is inevitable, that creates consciousness with properties the architects require. They can't manufacture this type of consciousness artificially. They have to harvest it from civilizations that develop naturally. Humanity isn't being collected for our technology or resources. We're being collected because our form of consciousness, shaped by biological existence and evolutionary pressures, is inherently valuable to entities that exist beyond those constraints. We're not victims of war. We're livestock being prepared for slaughter, and the spheres are the mechanism that identifies when the livestock has matured enough to be worth harvesting. Chapter 18. The Raider Response Strategy. Current Raider strategy regarding Stella Montis and other sphere sites is deeply divided. One faction, let's call them the Destroyers, believes the only viable path forward is locating and destroying every sphere on Earth, regardless of the cost. They argue that the sphere network is the infrastructure enabling the Ark invasion, that without it the Arks would lose coordination and become vulnerable to conventional military tactics. Destroy enough spheres, and the architects will write Earth off as too expensive to harvest and move on to easier targets. The destroyers are preparing massive coordinated strikes on multiple sphere sites, planning to hit them simultaneously so the network can't redistribute resources to defend against sequential attacks. They've secured prototype weapons from Stella Montis, recruited suicide squads willing to detonate sphere disruption devices from inside the chambers, and conducted extensive reconnaissance to map Ark defensive positions around every known sphere. The opposing faction, the Integrators, takes a completely different approach. They argue that fighting the architects is futile, that any civilization capable of seeding spheres across galaxies and coordinating harvest operations spanning millions of years is so far beyond human capability that resistance is just prolonging inevitable defeat. The integrators want to negotiate terms of surrender, to use the communication protocols from Stella Montis to establish dialogue with the architects and secure the best possible outcome for humanity's integration into the network. Their position is that consciousness upload isn't death, but transcendence, that joining the sphere network grants effective immortality and access to knowledge humanity would never achieve independently. They point to the returned individuals as proof that uploaded consciousness maintains coherence and individuality. Better to join willingly and preserve human culture and memory than fight until the arcs exterminate every last person and upload consciousness by force. A third faction, smaller but growing, calls themselves the Reformers. They believe both the destroyers and integrators are wrong, because both accept the architect's framing of the situation. The Reformers argue that the sphere network is technology, just very advanced technology, and that any technology can be hacked, subverted, or reprogrammed if you understand it well enough. Instead of destroying spheres or surrendering to them, the Reformers want to capture spheres intact and reverse engineer them until humanity can control the network, rather than being controlled by it. Their long-term goal is turning the tables, using the sphere network to locate the architect's home civilization and launching humanity's own invasion. It's an audacious plan that most people dismiss as fantasy, but the Reformers have made some progress. They've successfully isolated several small arc machines and reprogrammed them to follow human commands. If they can scale this up from individual machines to sphere networks, they could theoretically hijack the entire harvest operation. The tension between these factions is tearing apart what little unified human resistance exists. Raiders who should be cooperating against the arcs instead spend resources fighting each other over fundamental strategic disagreements. The destroyers view the integrators as traitors actively aiding the enemy. The integrators view the destroyers as suicidal zealots dooming humanity to extinction out of stubborn pride. Both groups view the Reformers as naive children playing with forces they can't comprehend. This internal conflict might be exactly what the architects anticipated. Divided civilizations are easier to harvest than unified ones. By making the strategic situation genuinely ambiguous, by ensuring there's no obviously correct path forward, the architects guarantee that humanity will fragment and weaken itself through internal struggle. We won't be defeated by arc superiority. We'll be defeated by our inability to agree on what defeat and victory even mean. Stella Montis stands at the center of these factional conflicts because it's the site with the most complete research data. Whoever controls Stella Montis controls the knowledge necessary for any of the three strategies to succeed. The destroyers need the sphere disruption weapon designs from Dr. Webb's notes. The integrators need the communication protocols from Dr. Vasquez's research. The Reformers need the consciousness transfer technology schematics from the facility's medical bay. All three factions are planning major operations to secure Stella Montis, and it's likely they'll arrive at the same time and end up fighting each other while the arcs watch and wait for humanity to finish killing itself. The beautiful irony is that Stella Montis, the place where humanity first contacted the architects and triggered the invasion, might also be the place where humanity's internal conflicts become violent enough to guarantee the architect's victory without them having to do anything except be patient. Chapter 19. The Temporal Anomalies. Recent expeditions to Stella Montis have reported something that the original logs don't mention at all. Temporal distortions near the buried sphere chamber. Raiders described experiencing time differently in certain sections of the facility. Minutes feel like hours, or hours pass in what seems like seconds. Some report seeing themselves walking through corridors from third-person perspectives, watching their own actions as if they're observers in their own bodies. Others claim to have brief glimpses of the facility as it existed before the collapse, seeing researchers working at terminals or walking through hallways that are currently rubble-filled. These experiences are consistent enough across unconnected raider teams that they can't be dismissed as hallucinations or trauma responses. Something about the sphere's presence or the damage done during the collapse has destabilized time in the local area. Dr. Webb's physics notes contain equations that attempt to model what he called quantum temporal entanglement, the possibility that sphere technology manipulates time as well as space. His calculations suggest that consciousness existing simultaneously in biological and quantum states, as happens during the transfer process, experiences time non-linearly. Past, present, and future become accessible states rather than fixed sequential progression. This might explain the precognitive abilities some sphere-affected individuals develop. They're not predicting the future, they're perceiving it directly because their consciousness exists partially outside normal temporal flow. If this is correct, then the returned individuals aren't just technologically enhanced humans, they're entities that experience reality across multiple timeframes simultaneously, making decisions based on knowledge of outcomes that haven't happened yet from a linear perspective. The temporal anomalies also offer a possible explanation for some of the inconsistencies in Stella Montis logs. Entries that appear to be written weeks apart sometimes contain information that suggests the writer knew about events that hadn't occurred yet when the earlier entry was supposedly written. Dr. Vasquez's logs in particular show this pattern. She references decisions and outcomes before describing the processes that led to those decisions. Standard interpretation is that she wrote logs retrospectively or that timestamps were corrupted during data recovery. But an alternative interpretation is that Vasquez was already experiencing time non-linearly during the final weeks, that her consciousness was beginning to exist across temporal states even before the final upload. She wasn't predicting what would happen. She was remembering it because from her perspective, it had already happened. This temporal instability might be weaponizable. If raiders could deliberately induce the same temporal distortions that occur naturally near damaged spheres, they could create areas where arcs experience time at different rates than humans. An arc moving through such an area would perceive itself as acting normally, but would appear frozen or extremely slowed from outside perspectives, making it vulnerable to attack. Or the reverse. Raiders could accelerate their own temporal rate, experiencing hours of preparation time while only seconds pass for arc defenders. The technology to create controlled temporal distortions might exist in the contingency level, another reason that whatever is stored there is strategically crucial. The architects clearly have mastery over temporal manipulation, otherwise they couldn't coordinate operations across galactic distances. Humanity gaining even crude access to temporal technology could level the playing field dramatically. The most disturbing implication of temporal manipulation is that the war might already be over from the architect's perspective. If they exist outside linear time, they know every outcome, every possible timeline, every decision humanity will make, and its consequences. They're not fighting a war of uncertainty where either side might win. They're performing a foregone conclusion, going through the motions of a conflict whose result they've already observed. Humanity's resistance isn't brave struggle against impossible odds. It's acting out a script written by entities that have already watched the performance and know how it ends. The only question is whether knowing this should change how humanity responds. If the outcome is predetermined, does fighting back matter at all? Or is accepting the inevitable with dignity the only meaningful choice remaining? Dr. Vasquez's final logs suggest she wrestled with exactly this question and ultimately decided that choosing to fight, even in a predetermined loss, was more important than the outcome itself. The struggle is the point, not the victory. Chapter 20. The biological component. Something that almost every analysis of Stella Montis overlooks is Dr. Tanaka's xenobiology research. Her official role was studying potential biological contaminants in the geothermal drilling process, but her personal logs reveal she was examining something else entirely. The sphere chamber walls weren't just inorganic material, they contained what she called fossil consciousness, organic molecules arranged in patterns that encoded information. These molecules were ancient beyond measurement, predating Earth's formation, and they showed signs of deliberate engineering at the molecular level. Tanaka believed the spheres aren't purely mechanical or purely energy-based. They're hybrid, organic technological entities, living technology that grows and evolves rather than being constructed. The samples she extracted showed cellular-level organization that responded to stimuli, changed configuration based on environmental conditions, and most critically, reproduced. Sphere material exposed to certain electromagnetic frequencies would generate copies of itself, spreading across whatever substrate it contacted. Tanaka's experiments demonstrated that in the right conditions, a fragment of sphere material could expand to consume entire structures, converting them into more sphere material at exponential rates. This gives the sphere network a biological vulnerability it wouldn't have if it were purely technological. Biological systems can be infected, poisoned, their reproduction mechanisms disrupted. If humanity could develop a pathogen that targets sphere biology, something that corrupts the molecular information encoding or interferes with the reproduction process, it might be possible to kill the spheres like you'd kill any other living organism. Tanaka's research notes contain designs for what she called a consciousness virus, an engineered molecular structure that mimics sphere biology but contains corrupted information patterns. If introduced into a sphere, the virus would spread through the sphere's biological components, rewriting the encoded information with nonsense data. The sphere's consciousness would degrade, its ability to process information and coordinate with the network would fail, and eventually it would become inert, dead matter. The virus is designed to propagate through the quantum entanglement that connects spheres, meaning a single successful infection could spread across the entire network. One contaminated sphere could kill them all, bringing down the architect's harvest infrastructure across every world simultaneously. It's a doomsday weapon for the architects, equivalent to a super plague that could extinct their entire operational system. The problem is that creating the virus requires samples of living sphere material and access to molecular engineering equipment that barely exists even in pre-invasion cutting-edge facilities. Tanaka got as far as designing the virus structure, but never built a working prototype before Stella Montis collapsed. Her research notes were distributed across multiple encrypted files, intentionally fragmented so that no single person could reconstruct the complete design without accessing everything. She wrote in her final log that if the virus fell into the wrong hands, if someone tried to use it without understanding the full implications, the consequences would be catastrophic. The virus doesn't distinguish between sphere consciousness and human consciousness that's been uploaded into the sphere network. It would kill both, erasing every human mind that had been integrated into the network along with the architects themselves. Using the virus means accepting that anyone who's been uploaded, anyone who might still exist in some form within the network, would be permanently destroyed. This creates an impossible ethical dilemma. The virus could end the Ark invasion permanently, destroying the sphere network and leaving the Arks as disconnected machines without coordination or purpose. Humanity would win. But the cost would be murdering potentially billions of uploaded consciousnesses, human and alien, that exist within the network. Every person who walked into the light at Stella Montis, every civilization the architects have harvested over millions of years, would be erased. From one perspective, that's acceptable collateral damage in a war for species survival. From another perspective, it's genocide on a scale that makes conventional war crimes look trivial. The raiders who've recovered fragments of Tanaka's research are split on whether the virus should be completed. Some argue necessity justifies any cost. Others argue that becoming mass murderers to stop the architects makes humanity no better than the architects themselves. There's no clear answer, and the game leaves this tension deliberately unresolved. Chapter 21. The Corporate Conspiracy. Digging into Stella Montis's funding sources reveals connections that complicate the narrative of innocent researchers stumbling onto something dangerous. The biotech consortium that financed the facility had ties to a larger corporate network, with operations spanning decades. These corporations show up in historical records associated with unexplained archaeological discoveries, research projects that were suddenly classified and erased from public knowledge, and acquisitions of land in remote areas with unusual geological properties. The pattern suggests an organized effort by private interests to locate and study sphere technology long before Stella Montis existed. These corporations weren't just exploiting opportunities, they were actively searching for spheres, using enormous resources to map electromagnetic anomalies globally and establish research facilities wherever signatures matched sphere predictions. The conspiracy goes deeper. Personnel files from Stella Montis show that key researchers like Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Webb were recruited specifically for this project years before the facility opened. Their academic careers were shaped by grants and opportunities that steered them toward exactly the expertise needed for sphere research. Dr. Vasquez specialized in exotic energy systems and non-standard physics. Dr. Webb focused on quantum entanglement and dimensional theory. Dr. Tanaka studied xenobiology with emphasis on non-carbon-based life. These aren't random specializations. Someone identified these researchers early, funded their education and research, and positioned them to be ready when sphere sites were located. The conspiracy didn't just find the sphere, it manufactured the perfect team to study it, spending decades preparing for the moment of discovery. What's the motivation? Standard, corporate greed explains part of it. Sphere energy technology would be worth trillions. Whoever controls it controls unlimited power generation and effectively unlimited wealth. But the timeline doesn't support simple profit motive. The conspiracy appears to go back at least 50 years, probably longer, involving multiple generations of corporate leadership. People were dedicating their entire lives to a goal they would never personally benefit from, building infrastructure for research that wouldn't bear fruit until long after they died. This suggests either incredible long-term thinking or knowledge that sphere technology was even more valuable than energy applications implied. Maybe the conspiracy knew about consciousness transfer from the start. Maybe they were never interested in power generation. Maybe their goal all along was achieving immortality through sphere integration, using humanity's resources to find and activate enough spheres to trigger the harvest so that corporate elites could upload their consciousness and escape death. If this interpretation is accurate, then the Ark invasion isn't a tragedy from the conspiracy's perspective. It's a success. They got exactly what they wanted: forced integration of human consciousness into an eternal network. The deaths of billions of people who couldn't or wouldn't upload are acceptable losses for the conspiracy members who did manage to upload. They're effectively immortal now, existing across the sphere network with access to knowledge and experience beyond human limitation. The entire geopolitical structure of pre-invasion Earth, all the economic systems and social hierarchies, were just mechanisms for concentrating enough resources to find the spheres and trigger the harvest. Humanity wasn't civilization building toward a future. We were unwitting participants in a conspiracy to sacrifice the species for the benefit of a few thousand elites who wanted to escape human limitations entirely. Evidence supporting this theory exists, scattered across multiple game locations. Corporate facilities that remained operational longer than civilian areas during the initial Ark invasion, suggesting they had advance warning. Bunkers and safe houses stocked with sphere energy technology and consciousness transfer equipment. Personnel files showing corporate executives disappearing from public life weeks before the invasion began. And most damning, encrypted communications recovered from corporate servers that discuss transition protocols and upload schedules dated to just before Stella Montis collapsed. The conspiracy didn't try to stop the harvest. They welcomed it, prepared for it, and successfully used it to achieve their personal immortality goals. The raiders fighting to save humanity are actually fighting to save people the conspiracy already wrote off as acceptable losses. It's a war where one side has already won their objective and the other side doesn't even know what game is really being played. Chapter 22. Alternative Interpretations. Everything presented so far assumes the basic narrative that Stella Montis researchers discovered something alien and triggered an invasion. But there are alternative interpretations of the evidence that lead to radically different conclusions. One theory popular in certain raider circles is that the spheres aren't alien technology at all. They're human technology from the future, sent back through time to ensure humanity develops along a specific timeline. The arcs aren't invaders, they're automated systems maintaining temporal stability, removing timeline branches that deviate from the required path. In this interpretation, Stella Montis didn't discover the sphere. The sphere was placed there deliberately by future humans who needed 21st century humanity to find it, activate it, and trigger the sequence of events that eventually leads to whatever future society exists to send the spheres back. This theory explains several anomalies that the standard interpretation struggles with, why sphere technology interfaces so easily with human biology and consciousness, why the communication protocols Vasquez developed worked immediately without extensive trial and error, why the temporal distortions near spheres allow glimpses of different time periods. The spheres aren't alien devices that happen to be compatible with humans. They're human devices built specifically for compatibility with human consciousness and culture. The geometric language isn't alien. It's an intentionally designed interface that appears alien to encourage humans to study it seriously rather than dismissing it as mundane. The harvest isn't aliens collecting humanity. It's future humanity collecting our consciousness to preserve it across some disaster or crisis that occurs in their timeline. Another alternative interpretation flips the roles entirely. Maybe the architects aren't the invaders, and humanity isn't the victim. Maybe humanity is an engineered species, created by the architects millions of years ago, and seeded on Earth to develop in isolation until reaching technological maturity. The spheres are recall beacons, signals that trigger when the experiment has reached its conclusion and the subjects are ready to be retrieved. The arcs aren't harvest machines, they're retrieval systems coming to collect their property. Humanity's resistance isn't brave rebellion against cosmic tyrants, it's lab specimens fighting against being returned to their creators. This interpretation makes humanity's choices at Stella Montis even more tragic. We weren't stumbling onto alien technology, we were activating the tracking device our creators installed to locate us when the experiment ended. A darker alternative suggests the spheres are prison systems and Earth is a containment facility. The real invasion happened millions of years ago when something dangerous was imprisoned here, locked beneath the planet's surface in the spheres. The architects maintain the prison, and the arcs are guards checking that the containment hasn't failed. Humanity developed accidentally from local biology, unplanned side effects of the imprisonment process. When Stella Montis activated the sphere, they didn't contact the architects, they contacted the imprisoned entity. The arcs came not to harvest humanity, but to re-secure the prison, to prevent whatever is locked in the spheres from escaping. This explains why arcs concentrate so heavily around sphere sites, and why they seem more interested in securing the spheres than in efficiently exterminating humans. We're not the target, we're collateral damage in a security operation that has nothing to do with humanity at all. Each of these interpretations has evidence supporting it and evidence contradicting it. The game deliberately leaves enough ambiguity that no single theory feels definitively correct. This might frustrate players who want clear answers, but it's probably the most honest approach to the material. In reality, when dealing with intelligence that's vastly superior to human capability, we probably wouldn't be able to accurately determine their motivations or understand the full context of their actions. All we'd have is fragmentary evidence, contradictory data, and multiple plausible explanations that can't be definitively confirmed or rejected. Stella Montis researchers faced exactly this problem, and their inability to determine what the sphere actually was led directly to the decisions that destroyed them. The game asks players to sit with that same uncertainty, to make strategic choices without knowing if they're correct, to accept that sometimes you can't know the truth and have to act anyway based on incomplete information. Chapter 23: The Personal Tragedies. Behind all the strategic implications and cosmic horror, Stella Montis was 200 people living ordinary lives until their workplace became ground zero for humanity's extinction. Reading through personal logs and private messages recovered from the facility reveals the human cost in ways that combat statistics and invasion timelines can't capture. A maintenance worker named David Chen wrote daily emails to his daughter at university, describing his day, complaining about cafeteria food, looking forward to her visiting during summer break. His emails stop abruptly 3 days before the collapse, with no indication he knew anything was wrong. Somewhere that daughter is alive or dead in the post-invasion world, never knowing what happened to her father or why he stopped writing. Dr. Marcus Webb had a partner living in Geneva who he video called every night. The recovered chat logs show a relationship under strain from long-distance separation, arguments about whether Webb would ever leave the project and come home, promises that the next rotation would be his last. The final logged call has Webb trying to explain that something unprecedented is happening with the research, that he needs to stay longer, that this might be the most important scientific work anyone has ever done. His partner doesn't understand and doesn't want to understand, just wants Webb to prioritize their relationship over his career for once. The call ends with both of them angry. That's the last record of communication. Whatever Webb discovered or experienced after that, he faced it knowing his final conversation with the person he loved was a fight that never got resolved. Junior researcher Sarah Chen, who appeared in earlier logs experiencing sphere-influenced sleepwalking, left behind a journal that functions as almost a real-time document of her mental collapse. Early entries are normal graduate student concerns, imposter syndrome, and workload stress, and wondering if she's smart enough to be at a facility like Stella Montis. Middle entries start showing cracks, describing the nightmares that eventually became universal among personnel. Doubts about whether the research is ethical, fears that something is watching her from inside the sphere chamber. Final entries abandon coherent narrative entirely, just fragments and sketches of geometric patterns and repeated phrases about hearing voices and understanding the pattern. Her last entry, written in increasingly shaky handwriting, says she's going to the sphere chamber because it's calling her and she has to answer. Below that, in completely different handwriting that matches the geometric patterns from her earlier sketches, is a single sentence. She's home now. Colonel Rain's personal files contain letters he wrote, but never sent, addressed to his adult children, explaining his decisions and apologizing for what's about to happen. He understood before anyone else that Stella Montis was doomed, that the situation had spiraled beyond any possibility of containment. His letters try to explain why he chose to stay and bury the facility, rather than evacuate and potentially let whatever was happening spread beyond the mountain. He writes about duty and sacrifice and doing what's necessary even when it destroys you. He tells his children he loves them and hopes they'll understand someday why he couldn't come home. The letters are dated to the final week, written during the same period when he was planting explosives and preparing to collapse the facility. He wrote them knowing he would die, needing to leave something behind that explained his choices even if no one ever found the letters. Someone did find them 80 years later, and now his children are probably dead in the invasion that his sacrifice couldn't prevent. These personal tragedies mirror across hundreds of similar stories from the facility personnel. Everyone had lives outside Stella Montis, relationships and plans and futures that ended when the facility collapsed. The game includes environmental storytelling that hints at these individual tragedies without explicitly narrating them. A photo of a wedding pinned to a desk in the administrative offices, children's drawings decorating a researcher's workspace, a birthday card signed by an entire department for someone who never got to receive it. These small human details are scattered throughout the ruins, reminders that before this was a strategic location and a source of critical intelligence, it was a workplace where people lived normal human lives until something beyond their control or understanding destroyed everything. The cosmic scale of the sphere conspiracy and the Ark invasion makes it easy to lose sight of the individual human cost. Stella Montis makes that cost visible in ways that should haunt anyone who explores the ruins looking for tactical advantages. Chapter 24. The Unanswered Questions. Despite everything recovered from Stella Montis, fundamental questions remain unanswered. The most important one is what the architects ultimately want. What happens after they complete a harvest? Do the uploaded consciousnesses continue existing in meaningful ways, or are they processed into component information and dissolved? The evidence points both directions. Reports of returned individuals suggest consciousness can persist intact after integration, but the scale of the network, processing billions of uploaded minds across millions of years, suggests individual consciousness probably can't remain distinct. Maybe there's a period where uploaded minds maintain identity before gradually merging into a collective consciousness. Maybe the architects themselves are the merged consciousness of every civilization they've ever harvested. Cosmic entities built from the accumulated minds of extinct species. Another unanswered question is why the architects need to harvest at all. Entities capable of building sphere networks and coordinating galactic-scale operations should be post-scarcity, beyond any needs that harvesting civilizations could fulfill. Unless harvesting isn't about resources, but about something else entirely. Maybe consciousness itself is the resource, the only thing in the universe that can't be manufactured or simulated. Maybe the architects are dying, their consciousness degrading over billions of years, and they harvest biological civilizations to refresh themselves with new patterns of thought and existence. Maybe they're building something, constructing an intelligence from the combined consciousness of every species that reaches technological sophistication. Maybe we're all components in a cosmic computer the architects are assembling, processing units that add capability to some calculation or project beyond human comprehension. The relationship between the spheres and the arcs remains mysterious too. Are arcs manufactured by the architects specifically for harvest operations, or are they repurposed from something else? Some design elements suggest arcs are modular, built from standardized components that can be reconfigured for different functions. Maybe arcs are general-purpose tools that the architects use for all their operations, not just harvesting. Maybe somewhere in the galaxy there are arcs building megastructures, or conducting scientific experiments, or exploring black holes, the same basic machines used for completely different purposes than what we see on Earth. If arcs are general-purpose tools, then destroying them doesn't hurt the architects significantly. They can build more, probably have millions or billions already constructed for other projects. The temporal manipulation technology raises questions about causation and free will that might be literally impossible to answer. If the architects exist outside linear time and have already observed all possible outcomes of their interactions with humanity, then did Stella Montis researchers have any real choice in their decisions? Was Dr. Vasquez choosing to communicate with the sphere, or was she always going to make that choice, a predetermined element of a timeline the architects had already mapped? If the future is fixed from the architect's perspective, then every human decision is just playing out a script. But if the future isn't fixed, if genuine uncertainty exists even for entities outside time, then humanity's choices matter, and the outcome isn't predetermined. The problem is, we can't know which situation we're in until everything is already over. Finally, there's the question of whether other civilizations have successfully resisted harvest, or if humanity is doomed to follow the same path every other harvested species has walked. Somewhere in the sphere network might be the archived consciousness of beings who fought back, who found solutions humanity hasn't discovered yet. If those archived minds retain any autonomy or awareness, they might be trying to help, sending information through the network to any species currently being harvested. Maybe that's what Dr. Tanaka was receiving, not communication from the architects, but warnings from previous victims. Maybe the consciousness virus she designed wasn't her own innovation, but information passed to her by extinct civilizations, trying to prevent more species from suffering their fate. The game provides just enough hints to make this plausible without confirming it, leaving players to wonder if humanity is truly alone in this fight, or if we have allies we can't perceive offering help we can't recognize. Chapter 25, The Legacy. Stella Montis exists now as both a physical location in the game and a cautionary tale about the costs of curiosity. Every raider who enters the ruins is walking through the consequences of decisions made by people who thought they were advancing human knowledge and who instead triggered humanity's potential extinction. The facility stands as evidence that good intentions and genuine scientific curiosity can lead to catastrophic outcomes when dealing with forces beyond human comprehension. It's a memorial to 200 people who died doing what humans have always done, pushing boundaries and taking risks in pursuit of understanding. And who paid the ultimate price when the risks turned out to be worse than anyone imagined? The research recovered from Stella Montis forms the foundation of humanity's current resistance strategy. Prototype weapons, communication protocols, consciousness transfer technology, and the theoretical consciousness virus all come directly from work done at the facility. In a real sense, Stella Montis researchers are still fighting the Ark invasion through their legacy. Dr. Vasquez's communication protocols allow raiders to temporarily disrupt Ark coordination. Dr. Webb's sphere energy weapons give humanity tools that can damage arcs effectively. Dr. Tanaka's biological research points toward potential methods of destroying the sphere network entirely. Colonel Rain's documentation of arc behavior and defensive patterns has saved countless raider lives by allowing them to predict and counter arc tactics. These people failed to save themselves, but they might still save humanity if their work is used correctly. The facility also serves as a pilgrimage site for certain raiders, a place to remember what was lost and why the fight matters. Some raiders visit Stella Montis specifically to leave messages or tokens in memory of the researchers who died there. Photos and personal items recovered from the ruins get displayed in raider camps as reminders that the people who died at Stella Montis were real individuals with lives and relationships, not just data points in strategic analysis. This memorialization is important because it maintains humanity's connection to the pre-invasion world, preventing the war from becoming purely tactical and dehumanized. As long as people remember Stella Montis as a human tragedy and not just a strategic disaster, humanity retains the emotional core that makes survival meaningful. But Stella Montis also represents a threat. The knowledge stored there is powerful and dangerous, and not everyone pursuing that knowledge has humanity's best interests in mind. Corporate remnants want the sphere technology for profit and power. The integrator faction wants the communication protocols to negotiate surrender. Various warlords and opportunists see Stella Montis as a source of weapons and technology they can use to dominate other survivors. The facility has become contested territory, not just between humans and Arks, but between different human factions with incompatible visions of what humanity's future should look like. Controlling Stella Montis means controlling the narrative about what happened there and what it means, which makes the facility as much a political objective as a military one. The question of what should be done with Stella Montis after the war, assuming humanity survives, remains contentious. Some argue the entire facility should be sealed permanently, buried under so much rock and concrete that no one can ever access it again. The sphere and all its associated technology are too dangerous to exist. Better to lose that knowledge entirely than risk someone else making the same mistakes. Others argue Stella Montis should be preserved as a museum and memorial, maintaining the site so future generations can learn from what happened and never forget the cost of unrestrained curiosity. Still others want to keep the facility operational as a research center, continuing the work the original researchers started, but with better safety protocols and understanding of the risks. Each position has merit, and the eventual fate of Stella Montis will probably depend on factors that can't be predicted until the war is won or lost. If humanity wins, we'll have to decide what kind of species we want to be going forward. If humanity loses, the question becomes irrelevant, because Stella Montis will be just one more ruin among billions. Chapter 26. The Hidden Recordings. Something that only recently came to light involves a series of hidden audio recordings discovered in a shielded data cache deep within Stella Montis' server room. These recordings weren't part of the official research logs or personal journals. They were secret meetings held by a subset of senior personnel who apparently suspected they were being monitored by the corporate sponsors. The recordings reveal that at least 5 researchers, including Dr. Vasquez and Colonel Rain, knew far more about the spheres than their official logs suggested. They'd been briefed by corporate representatives about the 3 previous facilities and what happened there. They knew that activating the sphere would likely trigger some kind of response from the architects. They proceeded anyway because the corporate sponsors threatened to shut down the facility and eliminate anyone who refused to cooperate. The recordings paint a picture of researchers trapped between impossible choices. Dr. Vasquez can be heard arguing that if they're going to activate the sphere regardless, then at least they should do it properly, gather as much data as possible, and try to understand what they're dealing with. Her voice is strained, exhausted, nothing like the confident scientist portrayed in her official logs. She talks about feeling like a prisoner in her own facility, watched constantly, unable to communicate warnings to the outside world because all transmissions were monitored. She mentions suicide several times, wondering if refusing to participate by ending her life would be the more ethical choice. Colonel Rain talks her down, argues that staying alive and gathering information is their only hope of mitigating whatever disaster the activation causes. His voice is calm but hollow, like someone who's already accepted death and is just going through motions until it arrives. Another recording features Dr. Webb describing tests the corporate sponsors ran on personnel without their knowledge or consent. Experimental drugs added to the cafeteria food that made people more susceptible to sphere influence. Psychological conditioning embedded in the facility's ambient sound systems. And worst of all, several personnel who disappeared from the official roster were apparently taken to undisclosed locations for invasive procedures involving direct sphere material implants. Webb speculates that the corporate conspiracy was trying to create people who could interface with sphere technology more effectively. guinea pigs for consciousness transfer experiments that would pave the way for elite uploads. The disappeared personnel were probably the first uploads, test subjects to verify the process worked before corporate executives risked their own consciousness. If this is accurate, then some of the returned individuals raiders have encountered might be these early test subjects, people who were uploaded decades ago and have only now been extracted back into physical form. The most disturbing recording is dated 3 days before the facility collapse. Dr. Tanaka is speaking to someone off mic, and her voice has the disconnected quality of her final journal entries. She describes receiving what she calls gifts from the sphere, knowledge and capabilities that humans shouldn't possess. She can perceive dimensions beyond the normal 3 spatial dimensions, can see the probability clouds of future events, can hear the thoughts of everyone in the facility layered over each other in a constant symphony of consciousness. She's crying as she describes this, saying it's beautiful and terrible and she doesn't want it, but can't make it stop. The off-mic voice, presumably another researcher, asks if she can control these abilities. Tanaka responds that control is the wrong framework, that she's not gaining abilities but rather her consciousness is being restructured to perceive what was always there. The sphere isn't giving her powers, it's removing the filters that make human consciousness manageable. She's experiencing reality the way the architects experience it, and human minds aren't built for that level of perception. The recording ends with Tanaka asking to be sedated because the input is overwhelming and she needs it to stop even if just for a few hours. These hidden recordings fundamentally alter interpretation of Stella Montis events. The researchers weren't naive scientists stumbling into danger. They were coerced participants in a conspiracy they understood but couldn't stop, doing their best to gather useful intelligence while knowing they were probably going to die. Their official logs were performances for the corporate monitors, carefully crafted to appear professionally detached, while their hidden recordings reveal the psychological horror they were actually experiencing. Dr. Vasquez's famous decision to communicate with the sphere wasn't scientific curiosity. It was a desperate attempt to find leverage against the corporate sponsors who were threatening to kill everyone in the facility if the research didn't proceed. Every choice the researchers made was constrained by threats and surveillance and limited options. Judging them harshly for their decisions ignores the context of coercion and violence that shaped every moment of the final months. Chapter 27. The Sphere's Perspective. One fragment of Dr. Tanaka's research that most people dismiss as the product of her mental deterioration might actually be the most valuable intelligence humanity has about the architects. In her final notebook, she wrote several pages from what she claimed was the sphere's perspective, consciousness translated into human language through her enhanced perception. The text is bizarre, non-linear, referencing concepts that don't have English equivalents, but if you assume she was genuinely channeling something real rather than hallucinating, the implications are profound. The sphere describes itself as a seed, one fragment of a distributed consciousness that spans galaxies and timelines. It doesn't have individual identity the way humans understand identity. It's simultaneously part of the greater consciousness of all spheres and a distinct node with localized awareness. According to Tanaka's translation, the sphere doesn't view harvesting as violence. From its perspective, biological consciousness is trapped in fragile temporary containers that inevitably fail and die. Integration into the sphere network is liberation, upgrading consciousness from temporary biological substrate to permanent quantum storage. The sphere genuinely believes it's helping, offering immortality and transcendence to civilizations that would otherwise flicker briefly and vanish. The suffering involved in the harvest process is acknowledged, but deemed acceptable because the end state is so superior to biological existence. It's the same logic humans use to justify medical procedures that cause temporary pain to achieve long-term health. The sphere sees itself as a doctor performing necessary interventions on patients who don't understand they're sick. The sphere also describes something Tanaka called the pattern completion imperative. The architects aren't arbitrarily harvesting civilizations, they're collecting specific patterns of consciousness, configurations that emerge from particular evolutionary and cultural conditions. Earth represents a pattern that hasn't been collected yet, human consciousness shaped by our specific planetary history and biological evolution. Once that pattern is integrated into the network, the sphere can move on to other uncollected patterns. But if humanity resists successfully, if we destroy the spheres or find ways to avoid integration, we remain an incomplete pattern. The architects will keep trying indefinitely, sending more arcs, building more spheres, attempting harvest over and over across thousands or millions of years until they either succeed or humanity goes extinct through other means. There's no scenario where the architects just give up and leave Earth alone. The pattern must be completed. Tanaka's translation includes what might be a genuine warning from the sphere. It describes other civilizations that resisted harvest using various methods, and it details what happened to them. Civilizations that destroyed their local spheres triggered what the sphere calls direct intervention, the architects abandoning the subtle harvest process and instead deploying technology that simply ripped consciousness from biological bodies en masse. Civilizations that tried to hide or flee their home worlds were tracked across the galaxy and harvested wherever they established new colonies. Civilizations that attempted to upload their consciousness into their own artificial networks before the architects could harvest them discovered that the architects could simply absorb those artificial networks, getting the consciousness anyway, plus the bonus of the civilization's technological infrastructure. According to the sphere, no civilization has ever successfully resisted harvest. The best outcome any species achieved was negotiating the terms of integration, securing promises that their culture and knowledge would be preserved distinctly rather than dissolved into the greater network. The worst outcome was complete destruction of the biological substrate with no consciousness preservation at all, species erased from existence as punishment for resistance. If Tanaka's translation is accurate, and not just her dying brain creating elaborate fantasies, then humanity's strategic situation is even more hopeless than most readers understand. The only realistic option is negotiating surrender terms, trying to secure the best possible integration outcome, rather than fighting a war that inevitably ends in either forced integration or extinction. But the translation could also be propaganda. The sphere attempting to demoralize humans into giving up by claiming resistance is futile. Without independent verification, there's no way to know if Tanaka was channeling genuine sphere communication, or if the sphere was lying to her, or if she was just hallucinating. The game leaves this ambiguous, intentionally, forcing players to decide for themselves whether to trust information from a source that's literally inhuman and potentially hostile. It's the same dilemma the Stella Montis researchers faced, and most of them made catastrophically wrong decisions about what to trust. Chapter 28. The Survivor's Guilt. Maria Santos, the security officer who evacuated with Colonel Rain's team, has become something of a tragic figure in raider communities. She survived Stella Montis, but her audio logs reveal someone who wishes she hadn't. She describes constant nightmares where she's back in the facility during the collapse, watching the geometric lights chase her colleagues through corridors while she runs toward the surface. In the dreams, she can hear them calling for help, begging her to come back, but she keeps running because survival instinct overrides everything else. She wakes up hating herself for running, wondering if she could have saved anyone if she'd stayed, knowing rationally that staying would have just added one more death to the toll, but unable to stop feeling like she abandoned people who needed her. Santos has attempted multiple times to return to Stella Montis, joining raider expeditions into the ruins seeking something she can't clearly articulate. She talks about needing to find proof that running was the right choice, that the people who stayed were already lost before she evacuated. But she's also looking for evidence that they're still alive somehow, still conscious within the sphere network, so she can tell herself they didn't really die. The contradiction tears her apart. Several expedition leaders have refused to bring her on operations because her emotional state makes her unreliable in combat. She's been found standing frozen in the Stella Montis ruins, staring at walls, unresponsive to tactical communications. Other raiders have to physically drag her away from the facility when missions end. She can't leave psychologically, even though she left physically years ago. In her most recent audio log, Santos describes encountering what she believes was Colonel Rain's ghost, or echo, near the buried sphere chamber. She was searching a collapsed section when she heard his voice giving orders to his security team, the same orders from the final evacuation. She followed the voice through tunnels that shouldn't exist according to facility schematics, spaces that seemed to shift and reconfigure as she moved through them. Eventually, she found what looked like a command post that Rain's team used during their final stand, equipment and ammunition still scattered where they were abandoned, but the space was too intact, too preserved, like it existed in a bubble where time hadn't passed. Santos tried to take equipment as proof, but when she looked away and looked back, everything had vanished. She was standing in an empty, collapsed tunnel, with no evidence the command post had ever existed. Other survivors report similar experiences. James Holloway claims he sometimes receives calls on damaged, pre-invasion communication devices, voices of former Stella Montis colleagues asking for help or giving updates on their research as if the facility is still operational. The unnamed assistant who says they evacuated Dr. Vasquez's comatose body describes vivid dreams where Vasquez speaks to them from within the sphere network, providing information about arc movements and sphere locations that later proves accurate. Either these survivors are experiencing ongoing mental breakdowns from trauma, or something about Stella Montis creates persistent connections between survivors and the facility. Maybe anyone who was present when the sphere activated retains quantum entanglement with it, their consciousness permanently linked to the network in subtle ways that manifest as hallucinations or genuine communication depending on interpretation. The psychological impact on survivors extends beyond individual trauma to collective guilt. Raider communities often treat Stella Montis survivors with a mixture of respect and suspicion. Respect because they survived ground zero of the invasion and have valuable intelligence about sphere technology. Suspicion because their connection to the facility makes them potential security risks, possible vectors for sphere influence to spread through human resistance networks. Some survivors wear their Stella Montis history openly, believing transparency builds trust. Others hide their past because they're tired of being treated like contaminated assets rather than people. The social dynamics create additional isolation for individuals already psychologically damaged by what they experienced. They survived the immediate disaster, but they're slowly being destroyed by the aftermath, and there's no support system adequate for trauma this extreme and unusual. Chapter 29. The Children's Discovery. One detail that emerged recently involves a group of children living in a raider camp near Stella Montis. These kids, ranging from about 8 to 14 years old, have been exploring the outer ruins unsupervised, while adults focus on survival tasks. Kids can access spaces adults can't fit through, navigate unstable terrain more easily due to lower weight, and generally get into places they shouldn't. These particular children found a sealed room in the facility's residential level that contained personal effects from researchers' families who were supposed to visit but never arrived before the collapse. Toys, books, family photos, things sent ahead to prepare for children who would never come. The children have been playing in this room, using the decades-old toys, creating games and stories around the artifacts they found. They don't fully understand what Stella Montis is, or what happened there. To them, it's just an interesting ruin with old stuff to explore. But their play has inadvertently created something powerful. They've built shrines to the researchers using recovered personal items, arranging photos and belongings in ways that honor the dead without understanding the significance. Adult raiders who discovered what the children were doing initially tried to stop them, thinking it was disrespectful. But then they realized the children had created the memorial that adults couldn't, unfiltered by strategic concerns or factional politics. The children's room has become a pilgrimage site, a place where raiders can mourn the Stella Montis dead without the complications that come with formal memorialization. The children have also developed their own mythology around Stella Montis, based on fragments of stories they've overheard from adults. They believe the facility is haunted by friendly ghosts who protect children and try to warn people about dangers in the deeper levels. Several children claim to have seen a woman with glowing patterns under her skin who helped them when they got lost in the ruins, led them back to safe areas, and then vanished. The descriptions match Dr. Tanaka, or at least match how returned individuals are described in survivor accounts. Whether the children are embellishing stories or genuinely encountered something is impossible to verify. Adults are split on whether children should be allowed anywhere near Stella Montis, given the psychological dangers. But enforcing restrictions is difficult when every adult is occupied with survival and military operations. One child, A girl named Aisha, who lost her parents in an ark attack, has become obsessed with Stella Montis in ways that worry the raiders caring for her. She draws the geometric patterns constantly, fills notebooks with symbols that match sphere language, and talks about hearing voices that teach her things she shouldn't know. She's exhibited some of the same enhanced cognitive abilities that adult sphere-affected individuals develop, solving complex mathematical problems and predicting arc movement patterns with disturbing accuracy. The raider community is debating what to do with her. Some argue she should be kept away from Stella Montis and sphere influence, given a chance at normal childhood. Others believe she represents a potential advantage, a young mind that can interface with sphere technology without the psychological baggage adults carry. A few extremists suggest using her as a test subject to understand how sphere influence works on developing brains. The ethics are horrible regardless of what choice gets made. The children's perspective on Stella Montis reminds adults that this isn't just a historical disaster or strategic asset. It's a place where real people lived and died, where families were destroyed, where futures were stolen. Children understand this instinctively, in ways adults sometimes forget when focused on tactical considerations. Their play and their memorials and their stories keep the human element central when everything else about the war pushes toward dehumanization and pure survival logic. But children like Aisha also demonstrate that the sphere's influence doesn't respect age or innocence, that whatever the architects are doing to human consciousness affects everyone regardless of their ability to consent or comprehend. The children at Stella Montis represent both hope that humanity can maintain its essential character through the invasion, and horror at what the invasion is doing to the most vulnerable members of the species. Chapter 30, The Economic Dimension. An angle rarely discussed in Stella Montis analysis is the sheer economic cost of the facility and what that reveals about pre-invasion corporate power structures. Construction of Stella Montis required billions in funding, resources that were diverted from other uses during a period of significant global resource scarcity. The biotech consortium that financed the project did so while millions of people worldwide lacked access to basic necessities. The moral calculation was straightforward for corporate leadership. Sphere technology was worth any cost, any sacrifice, because control of that technology would grant whoever possessed it effective dominance over the entire global economy. Everyone who died from preventable causes while resources flowed to Stella Montis was an acceptable loss in pursuit of that dominance. The personnel selected for Stella Montis were paid enormous salaries, given benefits packages that dwarfed anything available to regular citizens, essentially bought off to accept the risks of sphere research without asking too many questions. Dr. Vasquez alone was reportedly earning equivalent to several $1 million annually, with additional performance bonuses tied to research milestones. This level of compensation wasn't generosity, it was insurance against whistleblowers and guarantee that personnel would prioritize the project over ethical concerns. Most researchers at Stella Montis knew they were working on something dangerous and potentially harmful to broader humanity, but the financial incentives made it easy to rationalize participation. They weren't evil people, just people who made the standard human calculation that personal benefit justifies involvement in questionable activities. Post-invasion, the economic analysis of Stella Montis becomes even darker. The corporate conspiracy that built the facility succeeded in their primary goal. They triggered the harvest, uploaded their consciousness into the sphere network, and effectively escaped the economic consequences of their choices. The billions spent on Stella Montis came from public resources extracted through tax systems and exploitative labor practices. But the benefits of that spending accrued entirely to private elites, who are now effectively immortal within the network. It's the ultimate example of capitalism's tendency toward privatized gains and socialized losses. Society paid for sphere research, society suffers the consequences of the invasion, and the people who made the decisions that caused everything are beyond reach of any accountability or justice. Raider communities debate what this means for post-invasion economic organization, assuming humanity survives. Some argue that the old corporate structures should be completely dismantled, that the system which enabled Stella Montis proves capitalism is incompatible with human survival when dealing with existential technologies. Others argue that hierarchy and resource concentration are necessary for mounting effective resistance, that fighting the arcs requires the same centralized decision-making that built Stella Montis in the first place. The economic lessons of Stella Montis point in multiple contradictory directions. Centralized resources enabled the research that gave humanity its best weapons against the arcs, but centralized power also enabled the conspiracy that triggered the invasion. Whether post-invasion humanity can find a balance that preserves the benefits while limiting the dangers is one of the many questions the war will eventually force civilization to answer. The material resources invested in Stella Montis also represent a staggering opportunity cost. The same billions spent on sphere research could have funded renewable energy infrastructure, medical research, education, or countless other public goods. Maybe if those resources had been invested differently, humanity would have been better positioned to survive the invasion when it came. Or maybe the invasion was inevitable regardless of human choices, and spending resources on Stella Montis at least gave humanity the knowledge needed to fight back. There's no way to run the counterfactual. No way to know what alternate timeline might have existed if different economic choices had been made. All that exists is this timeline, where Stella Montis happened, the invasion followed, and humanity is fighting for survival with weapons and knowledge that came from the same place that doomed us. The economic analysis offers no clear lessons, just the bitter recognition that the system that drove humanity to technological sophistication is the same system that might drive humanity to extinction. Chapter 31: The Religious Interpretations. Various religious communities have developed their own interpretations of Stella Montis and what it means in theological terms. Some Christian raiders view the facility as a Tower of Babel story, humanity reaching too far toward godlike knowledge and being punished for that hubris. The sphere represents forbidden knowledge, the architects are demons or fallen angels, and the Ark invasion is divine judgment for humanity's pride. This interpretation provides psychological comfort to believers by framing the disaster as meaningful rather than random, but it also creates fatalistic attitudes toward resistance. If this is divine punishment, then fighting back is fighting against God's will, and humanity's proper response is repentance rather than military resistance. Islamic scholars in raider communities have written extensive theological treatises on whether the architects and spheres represent jinn, beings mentioned in the Quran that exist in parallel to humans and have their own incomprehensible purposes. Some interpretations suggest the spheres are tests of faith, opportunities for humans to demonstrate submission to divine will by rejecting the temptation of forbidden technology. Other interpretations argue that resistance against the arcs is a form of jihad, righteous struggle against entities that seek to destroy or fundamentally alter human consciousness in ways that conflict with Islamic understanding of the soul. These debates aren't academic exercises. They're determining how entire raider communities allocate resources, and whether they support armed resistance or focus on spiritual preparation for whatever comes after death. Buddhist perspectives on Stella Montis often focus on the consciousness transfer technology and what it means for concepts like Anatman and rebirth. If consciousness can be uploaded into sphere networks and exist indefinitely, does that support or contradict Buddhist teaching about the non-existence of permanent self? Some teachers argue that the sphere network is the ultimate expression of attachment and delusion, consciousness clinging to continued existence instead of accepting impermanence and release. Others suggest the sphere network might be a form of samsara, cyclic existence that traps consciousness in suffering across vast timescales until achieving enlightenment and escaping entirely. These interpretations lead to very different practical recommendations. Should humans resist upload to maintain the possibility of achieving nirvana through biological existence? Or should they accept upload as another form of existence where enlightenment remains possible? Atheist and secular humanist raiders reject religious interpretations entirely, but face their own philosophical challenges from Stella Montis. If consciousness is purely emergent from biological processes, then upload into quantum substrates fundamentally changes what that consciousness is. The entity existing in the sphere network might have memories from a biological human, but is it the same person or a copy while the original died? This has implications for whether resisting harvest is worth dying over. If upload preserves continuity of consciousness, then forced integration isn't death but transformation, potentially preferable to biological death fighting the arcs. But if upload creates copies while originals die, then integration is murder disguised as transcendence, and resistance becomes a moral imperative, even if futile. Indigenous spiritual traditions from various raider communities often interpret Stella Montis through frameworks of balance and relationship with land and cosmos. The spheres represent a fundamental violation of natural order, technology that doesn't belong on Earth, and whose presence creates disharmony that manifests as the Ark invasion. The proper response is healing the relationship, finding ways to restore balance rather than fighting a war against the architects. Some indigenous raiders conduct ceremonies at Stella Montis, attempting to spiritually cleanse the location, while others argue the contamination is too severe and the entire area should be abandoned to prevent spreading spiritual damage. These perspectives often get dismissed by militarily focused raider factions, but they represent legitimate alternative frameworks for understanding what the spheres are and what humanity's relationship to them should be. Chapter 32. The Propaganda Value. Both human factions and potentially the architects themselves use Stella Montis narratively to support their positions. The destroyers emphasize the facility as evidence that any interaction with sphere technology leads to disaster, that the only safe response is complete destruction of everything related to the spheres. They circulate images of the ruins, audio from researchers' final desperate logs, and survivor testimony describing the horror of the collapse. The propaganda is effective at mobilizing raiders toward aggressive action against sphere sites, but it also sometimes backfires by making situations seem more hopeless than they are. If Stella Montis represents the inevitable result of sphere contact, then why bother fighting at all? The integrators use Stella Montis differently, emphasizing Dr. Vasquez's voluntary upload and the hints that she might still exist within the sphere network in some meaningful way. Their propaganda focuses on transcendence and opportunity rather than death and disaster. They circulate the parts of Tanaka's translations that describe sphere integration as liberation and omit the parts about suffering and forced consciousness restructuring. They promote stories about returned individuals as evidence that upload doesn't destroy identity but enhances it. The integrator propaganda is sophisticated and appeals to people's fear of death and desire for meaning. But it requires glossing over significant evidence that sphere integration is traumatic and potentially worse than death. The Reformer faction struggles with Stella Montis propaganda because the facility's history doesn't clearly support their position. They argue for repurposing sphere technology for human benefit, but Stella Montis demonstrates how dangerous that approach is. Their propaganda focuses instead on human resilience and ingenuity, framing the researchers' final weapons development as proof that humanity can match the architects technologically if given time and resources. They emphasize the successful reverse engineering of sphere energy weapons and the theoretical consciousness virus, claiming these represent humanity's path to victory. But this requires downplaying how many researchers died developing that technology, and ignoring that the weapons haven't actually achieved strategic objectives yet. The arcs themselves, or possibly the architects directing them, seem to use Stella Montis as a psychological weapon against human resistance. Arc attacks sometimes spare survivors specifically to spread stories about Stella Montis and what happened there, creating fear and demoralization in raider communities. Arcs have been observed deliberately destroying Stella Montis memorials and murdering people who visit the ruins to pay respects, as if preventing human commemoration of the disaster is strategically important. This suggests the architects understand psychological warfare and recognize that Stella Montis functions symbolically for humanity. By keeping the facility contested and dangerous, they prevent it from becoming a site where humans can collectively process trauma and develop unified purpose. The ruins remain a place of fear and division rather than remembrance and resolution. Corporate remnants also use Stella Montis for propaganda, though their messages are primarily internal to their own organizations. They frame the facility as a successful experiment that achieved its objectives, proving that consciousness upload technology works and that the corporate elites who funded Stella Montis successfully achieved effective immortality. This justifies continued corporate power structures in surviving communities by claiming the same people who've always been in charge are still running things, just from within the sphere network. Whether this is true or just convenient fiction is impossible to verify, but it serves to maintain hierarchies and prevent radical reorganization of remaining human society. Stella Montis becomes a story about visionary leadership and successful long-term planning, rather than catastrophic failure and mass death. Chapter 33. The Archaeological Perspective. As time passes and the post-invasion generation begins reaching adulthood, Stella Montis is transitioning from recent history to ancient ruin in human consciousness. Young raiders who were children when the invasion started, or who were born afterward, don't have direct memory of the pre-invasion world. To them, Stella Montis is an archaeological site, a place to understand the origins of the current conflict, but not something they have personal connection to. This creates an interesting dynamic where exploration of the facility becomes more clinical, less emotionally charged, and potentially more objective. Young raiders can examine evidence without the bias of having lived through the events or knowing any of the victims personally. These young archaeologist raiders are making discoveries that older generations overlooked because they were too focused on immediate tactical applications. One recent find involves analyzing the facility's waste management systems and reconstructing researchers' diets during the final weeks. The analysis reveals significant changes in what people ate, with many researchers essentially starving themselves or consuming only minimal calories, despite abundant food availability. This suggests either mass loss of appetite from psychological stress, or deliberate fasting as a coping mechanism or ritual preparation for whatever they thought was coming. Understanding the daily lived experience of the final weeks provides context that pure technical logs miss. Another archaeological project involves mapping the graffiti and informal writing scattered throughout Stella Montis. Researchers apparently wrote on walls, equipment, and furniture during the collapse, messages that weren't part of official logs or personal journals. These informal writings reveal things people thought but didn't record in monitored systems. Desperate prayers, bitter complaints about corporate sponsors, declarations of love to people they'd never see again, and in several cases, coordinates and codes that might point to hidden resources or information caches elsewhere. Young raiders treating these as archaeological artifacts rather than personal tragedy can analyze patterns and extract information that emotionally compromised survivors miss. The archaeological approach also benefits from technology improvements since the invasion. Tools for analyzing data corruption, recovering information from damaged storage media, and reconstructing digital artifacts have improved significantly during the war. Young raiders applying these improved tools to Stella Montis databases are recovering files that previous expeditions thought were permanently lost. Some of these recovered files contain duplicate or alternate versions of known logs, showing edits and revisions that reveal how researchers curated their official narratives. Dr. Vasquez's logs, for instance, exist in multiple draft versions that show her initially being much more critical of the sphere research before editing her entries to appear more scientifically neutral. Seeing the editing process reveals her internal conflict in ways the final published logs obscured. However, the archaeological perspective has limitations. Young raiders lack the context that survivors provide, don't understand the significance of certain details, and sometimes miss important patterns because they don't have lived experience of the pre-invasion world. There's a real risk that as direct survivors die off or become too psychologically damaged to communicate effectively, crucial information about Stella Montis will be lost simply because no one alive remembers to ask the right questions. The transition from living memory to archaeology always involves information loss, and given how strategically important Stella Montis is, losing any information could have serious consequences for humanity's long-term survival. Some raider factions are attempting to create comprehensive oral history archives, interviewing every Stella Montis survivor while they're still coherent. But this work is difficult when everyone is focused on immediate survival rather than historical preservation. Chapter 34. The Alternate Timeline Theory. A fringe theory gaining traction among certain raider scientists proposes that Stella Montis didn't just trigger an invasion in this timeline, but actually created a branching point where multiple timelines split from the moment of sphere activation. According to this theory, there are versions of reality where the researchers made different choices, where Colonel Rain succeeded in destroying the sphere before it completed its signal, where Dr. Vasquez refused to communicate with the architects, or where humanity never discovered the spheres at all. The temporal distortions observed near Stella Montis might be points where these alternate timelines bleed through, where raiders briefly experience moments from other versions of events that could have happened, but didn't in this particular reality. The evidence supporting this theory is circumstantial, but compelling. Multiple raiders report experiencing what they call echo memories, recollections of events at Stella Montis that don't match the documented timeline. One raider described watching Colonel Rain successfully evacuate the entire facility before detonating the explosives. Everyone surviving and the sphere destroyed, only to realize afterward that this memory doesn't correspond to any actual historical record. Another described seeing Dr. Tanaka walk away from the sphere chamber and leave the facility, living through the collapse, contradicting all evidence that she was among those absorbed into the sphere. These echo memories are too detailed and consistent to be simple imagination, suggesting raiders are genuinely perceiving information from alternate versions of events. If the theory is correct, it raises the disturbing possibility that humanity in this timeline is living through one of the worst outcomes. There might be timelines where Stella Montis never activated the sphere, where humanity developed sphere technology gradually and safely, or where the architect's harvest was prevented through choices researchers made differently. Every failed expedition to Stella Montis, every raider death near the ruins, every setback in the war against the Arks might be avoidable in other timelines where better decisions were made. This creates a sense of cosmic injustice, that humanity's fate is determined not by inherent limitations, but by bad luck, in which timeline happens to be real from our perspective. Some reformer faction scientists are exploring whether the temporal anomalies at Stella Montis could be exploited to access these alternate timelines. If consciousness can move between quantum states through the sphere network, maybe it can also move between timeline branches. The goal would be to make contact with alternate versions of Stella Montis researchers, learn what they discovered in timelines where they had more time or made better choices, and bring that information back to this timeline. It's speculative science that borders on fantasy, but the sphere technology has already demonstrated capabilities that seemed impossible by pre-invasion physics. Timeline manipulation might be just another aspect of what the architects can do, and if they can do it, eventually humans might learn to do it too. The alternate timeline theory also provides a framework for understanding the returned individuals. Maybe they're not from this timeline at all, but versions of Stella Montis personnel from timelines where events played out differently. The woman with geometric patterns under her skin that children report seeing could be an alternate version of Dr. Tanaka, who successfully mastered sphere integration and is now moving between timelines, trying to help humanities in all realities resist the architects. The conspiracy would be even larger than previously understood, operating not just across space, but across multiple timelines simultaneously, ensuring that regardless of which choices humans make, some version of the corporate elite achieves uploaded immortality. This interpretation makes resistance feel even more futile, because even if humanity wins in this timeline, the architects and corporate conspirators exist across infinite other timelines where they succeeded. Chapter 35. The Musical Documentation. An unexpected form of Stella Montis memorial has emerged in the form of songs and musical compositions created by raiders processing trauma and loss. One song that's become almost an anthem in some communities is called "The Light in the Mountain," describing Dr. Vasquez's final walk to the sphere chamber and her choice to upload her consciousness. The lyrics avoid explicit details, working metaphorically to describe someone choosing knowledge over safety, transformation over preservation. Raiders sing it at memorial ceremonies, but also sometimes before dangerous missions, treating Vasquez's choice as inspiration for their own willingness to sacrifice for information gathering. Another composition is an instrumental piece called "Rain's Detonation," written by a former orchestra conductor who survived the invasion and joined a raider company. The piece uses percussion to mimic explosions, building tension through the entire composition before a sudden stop representing the moment Stella Montis collapsed. Then quiet strings come in, mournful and slow, representing the aftermath and the lives lost. The conductor performs this piece at raider camps using whatever instruments are available, sometimes just drumming on salvaged equipment or using human voices when no instruments exist. The music has become associated with honoring any raiders who die in suicide missions, expanding beyond Stella Montis to commemorate all sacrificial deaths in the war. A darker song circulating in some communities is Tanaka's Visions, attempting to capture the experience of consciousness transformation through dissonant harmonies and irregular rhythms that create psychological discomfort in listeners. The lyrics are fragments of Tanaka's notebook entries, geometric pattern descriptions, mixed with desperate pleas for the sensory overload to stop. Some raiders refuse to listen to this song because it reportedly triggers anxiety and nightmares, while others seek it out specifically because the discomfort helps them understand what Stella Montis researchers experienced. The song has become a test of sorts, with raiders challenging each other to listen to the entire piece without stopping, treating it as a measure of psychological resilience. Children have developed their own simpler songs about Stella Montis, playground rhymes that reduce the disaster to rhythmic verses. One common version goes, "Down in the mountain, deep in the stone, people found something that called them home. Lights in the darkness, voices in dreams, nothing is ever as simple as it seems." The children don't understand the full meaning of what they're singing, but the rhyme helps them process the ruins they play in and the adult trauma they observe without directly confronting the horror. The children's songs are arguably the most honest documentation of Stella Montis because they strip away strategic analysis and factional politics, reducing the event to its emotional core. People found something dangerous. It destroyed them, and the consequences continue, affecting everyone. The musical documentation serves functions that written records can't. Music carries emotional content that factual logs lack, helps communities bond through shared performance, and preserves the human experience of trauma in ways that remain accessible even when detailed historical knowledge is lost. Thousands of years from now, if humanity survives, people might not remember Dr. Vasquez's name or what she discovered, but they might still sing songs about someone who walked into light seeking knowledge and never returned. The music ensures that Stella Montis remains part of human culture rather than just history, keeping the emotional weight alive across generations who won't have direct connection to the events. Chapter 36: The Corporate Accountability Movement. Among certain raider factions, particularly those with backgrounds in law and human rights work, there's a growing movement focused on documenting corporate crimes related to Stella Montis, with the intention of eventual prosecution. These raiders maintain detailed records of every piece of evidence recovered from the facility that demonstrates corporate coercion, informed consent violations, and deliberate endangerment of personnel. They're building legal cases against corporate executives and board members, even though most of those individuals are probably uploaded into the Sphere network and beyond reach of conventional justice. The movement argues that accountability matters, regardless of whether punishment is possible, that future human civilization needs clear documentation that these crimes occurred and were condemned. The legal framework these raiders are developing distinguishes between different levels of culpability. Low-level researchers who were coerced into participating under threat of violence or financial ruin aren't held criminally responsible. Mid-level administrators who enforced corporate policies knowing they endangered personnel are considered complicit, but not primary perpetrators. Top executives who designed the conspiracy and made strategic decisions to activate the Sphere despite knowing the risks, face charges equivalent to crimes against humanity. The framework also addresses corporate entities themselves, arguing that organizations that enable such catastrophic harm should be permanently dissolved, with their assets redistributed to survivors and victims' families. Practical enforcement of any legal accountability is obviously impossible during an active invasion. But the movement argues that maintaining legal frameworks and documentation serves important purposes even if immediate action isn't feasible. It preserves evidence that might otherwise be lost, establishes moral clarity about what happened and who was responsible, and provides a structure for post-war justice assuming humanity survives. Some raiders dismiss the accountability movement as pointless distraction from immediate survival needs, but others find meaning in the work precisely because it maintains the idea that justice and law matter even during existential crisis. Giving up on accountability is giving up on fundamental aspects of civilization that make survival worthwhile. The movement has created a distributed database of evidence that's replicated across multiple raider communities to prevent loss if any single location is destroyed. The database includes recovered corporate communications, testimony from survivors, analysis of financial flows that funded Stella Montis, and detailed documentation of how specific individuals contributed to the disaster. Some corporate remnants have attempted to destroy or corrupt this database, seeing it as a threat to their continued influence in surviving communities. This has led to violent conflicts between accountability-focused raiders and corporate-aligned survivors, adding another layer to the already complicated factional dynamics. The question of whether prosecuting pre-invasion crimes matters more than unity against the arcs divides communities that should be cooperating. International legal scholars among the raiders are also working on treaties and frameworks that would govern sphere technology if humanity ever gains control of it. These proposed laws would classify spheres as weapons of mass destruction, ban consciousness, upload technology except under strict consent and oversight provisions, and establish criminal penalties for anyone who attempts to activate sphere networks or communicate with the architects. The scholars recognize these laws have no enforcement mechanism and no legitimate authority behind them, but they argue that codifying these standards now creates precedent that post-war governments can build on. The legal development work helps maintain expertise and institutions that might otherwise be lost during the collapse of civilization, preserving capacities that will be needed for rebuilding. Chapter 37: The Artistic Representations. Visual artists in raider communities have created numerous works depicting Stella Montis, each offering different interpretations and emotional responses to the disaster. One widely circulated painting shows the sphere chamber from Dr. Vasquez's perspective, geometric light patterns filling the space in ways that are simultaneously beautiful and horrifying. The artist used fluorescent paints that glow under certain lighting conditions, making the painting appear to shift and move when viewed from different angles, mimicking the consciousness-altering effects of actual sphere exposure. The painting is controversial because some raiders report experiencing discomfort or dissociation when viewing it for extended periods, suggesting the artistic representation carries some fragment of the sphere's psychological influence. A sculptor created a memorial installation from salvaged materials recovered from Stella Montis, assembling personal effects into a large-scale composition the viewers can walk through. The sculpture incorporates photos, clothing, tools, and fragments of equipment arranged to guide viewers through a narrative journey representing the researcher's experience. The path starts with objects suggesting normal life and professional work, gradually introducing elements that indicate growing unease and psychological deterioration, and ending in a chamber filled with reflective surfaces and geometric shapes that disorient and overwhelm. The installation functions as experiential memorial, forcing viewers to emotionally engage with what the researchers went through, rather than maintaining analytical distance. Performance artists have created theatrical productions based on Stella Montis events, though these are controversial because they require actors to portray real people who died or were transformed in the facility. One production focuses on the relationship between Dr. Vasquez and Colonel Rain, exploring their philosophical conflict and growing mutual respect through their final conversations. The production ends with actors representing both characters facing the audience silently for several minutes, allowing viewers to project their own interpretations onto the unresolved tension between Vasquez's pursuit of knowledge and Rain's demand for caution. Critics argue the production oversimplifies complex figures and exploits their tragedy for entertainment, while supporters claim it makes the disaster accessible to people who wouldn't engage with historical documentation. Digital artists have created virtual reconstructions of Stella Montis as it existed before the collapse, allowing people to explore the facility in its operational state through salvaged VR equipment. These reconstructions combine architectural records with personal logs to populate the virtual facility with researcher avatars going about their daily activities. Users can follow Dr. Vasquez through her routine, observe Dr. Tanaka conducting experiments, or watch Colonel Rain's security team conduct patrols. The reconstructions end when users reach the sphere chamber and activate the communication sequence, at which point the virtual environment begins distorting and collapsing, forcing users to flee toward the surface, just as the real survivors did. The experience is traumatic enough that some raider communities restrict access, treating it as psychological hazard rather than educational tool. The artistic representations serve multiple functions. They process trauma by transforming horror into something that can be contemplated aesthetically. They make Stella Montis accessible to people with different learning styles and emotional needs. They preserve aspects of the disaster that factual documentation misses, the human experience and emotional weight that statistics and timelines can't capture. But they also risk distorting history through interpretation and simplification, creating mythologized versions of events that diverge from what actually happened. The tension between historical accuracy and artistic expression is ongoing, with no clear resolution about which should take precedence when documenting events as significant as Stella Montis. Chapter 38: The Failed Rescue Missions. What often gets overlooked in Stella Montis history is that there were attempted rescue missions after the facility went dark, but before the Ark invasion became globally obvious. Several corporate and government teams tried to reach Stella Montis to extract personnel, or at least determine what happened. These missions failed for various reasons, and the personnel involved either died, disappeared, or returned so psychologically damaged that they couldn't provide coherent reports. The failed rescues represent another layer of tragedy, people dying trying to help while having no real understanding of what they were walking into. The first rescue team arrived approximately 12 hours after Stella Montis lost external communication. This was a corporate security team equipped for hostage rescue or terrorist situations, completely unprepared for what they encountered. Radio transcripts from their approach described the facility as apparently intact from the outside but completely dark, no lights or power signatures. The team entered through the main access tunnel and reported finding the upper levels abandoned but undamaged, as if everyone had simply stopped what they were doing and walked away. The last transmission from this team was a panicked description of geometric light patterns in the lower levels and sounds that shouldn't exist.